Welcome everybody to our planning committee. And please all make sure that mobile phones are switched off before we commence. Most of us are used to it now anyway. I'll do the introductions first of all. But before that, I would like to say congratulations to one of our very valued member of the committee who had quite a milestone birthday in the holidays which some of us weren't aware of, so well done for reaching that goal. Thank you. Introductions now. Myself, I'm County Councillor Ruth Edwards and I chair the Planning Committee.
County Councillor Peter Clark and I'm the Vice Chairman.
Yes, Robert Tranter, Solicitor and the Legal Advisor to this committee.
Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager with the Council.
Mark Hand, Head of Planning, Housing and Place Shaping.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services Officer.
Paula Clark, Development Management Area Manager.
Craig O'Connor, Development Management Area Manager.
Thank you very much, all, and I'm sure there are new people perhaps in the public area at the back. Can you hear perfectly all right at the back? And if you can't, please raise your hand if you can't hear what the members are saying, because we are live streaming. You find it difficult to hear?
Some people, yes.
Right, if you get... Right, thank you. If you're having difficulty in a debate, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Right, apologies for absence, please.
Just one apology, Chair, from Councillor Blakeborough.
Right, thank you, Richard. Declarations of interest, please. Councillor Giles Howard.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll declare an interest on agenda item 4.8 because I provided informal advice to the applicant via a third party. And on 4.1, the alterations to the garage, I've already made my views on the development known. I will stay in the meeting and express that opinion, but I won't vote on it.
Right, thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Item 4.9, I believe it is, the temporary sports building on the school as a member of the 21st Century Project Board.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 4.9, again, I'm a member of the 21st Century School Board.
Right, thank you for that. And I myself declare interest on 4.11 on the agenda, as it is a member of my own family, so I will not vote and I will leave the chamber for that. And the Vice Chair will present that with the officer. Thank you. Now we go on to confirm the minutes of the last Planning Committee, the beginning of August. And this is for accuracy only. Page 1. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6 and page 7.
Move them correct.
Moved by Councillor Higginson. Do you have a seconder, please? By Councillor Matt Feakin, and I will sign those with Richard at the end of the meeting. You all approve that as well? Thank you very much. And the first... we don't always take them in order that they come up on the agenda, but if there's public speaking, we will usually deal with those first. But as it is first on the agenda, 4.1 on pages 9 to 28, application, that's 000027 at Prior Rest Mill. And I believe it's presented by Phil. Thank you very much, Phil.
Chair. Okay, this is a site we visited yesterday. Just have a quick look at some of the pictures. That's taken from the field that adjoins the lane that leads down the lane to the right behind the hedge. And you can see the electricity substation in the distance and the sites beyond that. That's the existing pumping station. We could see that yesterday, the hard standing near it. That's the existing intake by the river where the abstraction takes place. That's flood defences near Miller's Cottage, which is one of the adjoining dwellings further down the river. And that's also taken from Miller's Cottage garden, looking up towards the Transformers building there, which is the brick building with the pitch roof, and then the the sort of vaulted roofs there are the actual pumping station with intake to the right of it by the river. And then that's a sort of similar shot, but from Miller's, must be the house itself, looking towards a transformer building with the pumping station sort of slightly obscured beyond that. And that's the site location plan. So I'll just do an introduction and then carry on with the plans in shortly. So this is a planning application to construct a replacement raw water pumping station at Prioress Mill Lane to extract water from the River Usk, which is then pumped to feed Llandegfedd Reservoir. The reservoir supplies water to Cardiff and its environs. Prioress Mill pumping station has been identified by Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water as a high-risk asset with operational and maintenance issues based upon the reliability, age and safety of the installed mechanical and electrical equipment. All mechanical and electrical assets are estimated to be 35 years old and are considered to be in poor condition. Corrosion and leakage are present on the pumps and mechanical installation, and the pumps and shafts are subject to a high failure rate and maintenance spend. The motors, electrical switchgear, assemblies and controls are also 35 years old and at the end of their serviceable life. NRW is due to introduce new abstraction licence constraints at Prioress Mill by the end of 2018. The seasonal constraints under the new licence conditions increase the need for an updated and fit-for-purpose pumping system. Under the new abstraction licence, maximum pump availability will be required between November and March each year in order to replenish the reservoir. Any failure at Prioress Mill resulting in a capacity reduction may result in the reservoir's levels remaining low throughout the summer period, and there is a subsequent risk of a shortage of water to the Cardiff distribution area. In addition, the existing water intake screening facilities at the mill, at the water pumping station do not meet the requirements of the Habitats Directive and other regulations, and so need to be upgraded. So let's just have a look at the plan. So that's the site, sorry, going back to that one, that's the site in context. You can see where it is, and it's just sort of north of our site here, where we sit, and very obviously close to the River Usk for operational reasons. So that's where the pumping station is proposed. I don't think I can get my cursor to work on this, so I will have to point, I'm afraid. So the current building is in this location. The transformer building is here. So you'd see a shift over to the west of the proposed building, with intake again shifted similarly over to the western part of the river bank, and the houses are along here in Prioress Mill Lane. Miller's Cottage is here, and there's another dwelling here and some dwellings in there as well. And that's the old piggery site, to put it in context. And the electrical substation, which is a Western Power Distribution substation, is here. The new transformer building would go in here, so it would be demolished from there over to here. And that's a sort of closer slide of the proposed development, with the building in grey and the intake to the north of it, as it's shown there. And there'll be green infrastructure planted around it on both sides to obviously provide some mitigation for loss of habitat and indeed make enhancements. And that's a green infrastructure plan, concept plan. That sort of speckled area to the right of the building is where we saw that the dormouse habitat will go. A wildflower meadow, rather, the speckled area, and the hatched area to the right of that again is where the dormouse habitat would be proposed. You can see clearly where the transformer building is, next to the substation. And then that's a landscaping plan, which is similar. That shows the intake screen there, section through it, taken from the riverside. And then that's a section through the building. So the screen you just saw in that previous one is this structure here. So the water is then pumped up into the building, and it pumps on the main buildings, and it's pumped then via that structure to Llandegfydd. The building would be in the region of about 10 metres high from existing ground level, which is about 4 metres higher than the existing structure there. So that's showing, the upper slide is showing where the profile of the existing buildings, and that's showing the lower one is showing the sort of profile of the proposal. And then that's showing a sort of a montage, if you like, of the year one arrangement up above, and then later on we see some more planting over to the left-hand side of the cladded building itself. And then there's a further slide which shows, again in year one up above, which is a view taken from the Usk Valley Walk, which is looking towards the east, over the buildings in the background, and the Western Power substation there, and then eventually there will be an effective screen planted there to help mask, as you see in the lower photo, the actual buildings itself, new buildings itself, and indeed to some degree the substation. So if I rested on the, go back to the layout. Yeah, leave it on that one. Okay, so as we saw from the site yesterday, the replacement pumping station would be situated to the west of the existing building, which would be further away from existing dwellings along the lane to the east. There would be dormouse habitat planted up between the replacement pumping station and the large conifer hedge to the east, beyond which are the existing dwellings. The replacement building would be around 4 metres higher than the existing structure, would be set 30 to 40 metres away from nearby residents, and would be clad in a non-reflective grey metal cladding at lower levels and vertical timber boarding above, as recommended by the council's landscape officer, to reduce its impact and resemble a more agricultural type of building. The existing electricity transformer building in the eastern part of the site would be demolished and replaced with a transformer located close to the existing Western Power substation. The existing pumping station would remain operational while the new one is being built, and would be demolished once the replacement has come into use. The construction period would take up to 3 years, and a construction management plan has been approved by your highway officers, and if consent is granted, would be conditioned to be implemented. There would be a temporary access to the site to avoid using the no, it's going to do this again.
Okay.
Apologies, it's looking to close my computer down and make updates. We did this happened before. It always seems to be on a Tuesday, doesn't it? Bear with me. Okay. It's quite frustrating, isn't it? There'll be an access about 50 metres west of the junction with Prior S Mill Lane, the current access, although a second field gate access would be used for the initial 2 to 4 months for ecological reasons before the main temporary access is deployed. So they won't use Prior S Mill Lane itself, as it's too narrow for construction traffic, and that would also reduce disruption to residents. The main issues are discussed in detail in the report. The scheme has been amended several times, and further modelling has been carried out in terms of noise and flooding issues to satisfy the statutory consultees, including NRW and the Council's Environmental Health Officer, on these matters. There are no objections to the scheme in terms of noise, as the proposal would lead to a betterment in respect of noise impact on nearby dwellings. The new pumping station would be quieter and have noise insulation measures designed into the scheme, unlike the current buildings. The scheme has been remodelled to reflect the fact that the transformer building near Miller's Cottage would be demolished and would offer no noise mitigation as a result. And the results of that modelling have satisfied our Environmental Health Officer. NRW has no objection to the scheme on flooding grounds. In respect of ecology, the scheme has also satisfied NRW and our in-house ecologists, and subject to conditions to ensure the integrity of protected species are safeguarded, and the green infrastructure is provided, the ecological impacts can be suitably mitigated, and indeed enhancements made in the form of native woodland planting and hedgerow provision. The building would be large, but the choice of materials is appropriate and would reflect the rural character of the area. The additional planting will help assimilate the new development into the landscape, and the site is seen in context as a brownfield site for an existing utility use which already contains significant infrastructure. Thus, the proposal is considered to be acceptable in landscape terms in this sense. And subject to the conditions listed on pages 25 to 27 of the agenda, we would recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. I do believe the local member wishes to speak on the application. As a local member, you have 6 minutes, and if you so wish later on, you can have another 2 minutes to sum up. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
You'll start timing me. Our planning officer has given the broad outlines to this scheme. It's a very big scheme. It's going to last for 3 years. It is a necessary scheme. The situation there is not as satisfactory now, and none of us want to deny Cardiff and District its water supply. So it is a work that needs to go ahead, but it has huge implications. I trust that Natural Resources Wales, they're introducing that new abstraction licence, which is going to require a lot more pumping between November and March to ensure a maximum to Llandegfirth. But I would like to think that they are fully aware of the impact of the proposals on the River Usk. It's not just the actual sites that you're looking at, it is the impact of doing anything alongside a water flow. You've got a considerable impact into the river with the new construction, but I hope that every account has been taken of that and the impact it will have on the flow of the river, on the banks and downstream. And I hope that they will ensure proper mitigation now and in the future, not just look at it. I had a little smile, a little smile afterwards. The report says that it will have moderate adverse impact on the landscape character and visual amenity. And members visited the site yesterday, and I thank you for coming. You can draw your own conclusions from what you saw and what the officers have told you. In this, it is necessary to, nowadays, necessary to consider the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act of 2015. And as I read this report, I had a little smile because there's quite a lot of reference to the bats, the dormice, the birds, the otters, but is singularly missing in any reference to Homo sapiens. Now, during my tenure as a councillor, I've had at least 2 other long drawn-out sagas relating to pumps and fans and installations, things that were not done properly at the outset, and they dragged on for years, and the misery that it caused local residents, not this site, but a couple of other sites, I don't want to see that replicated at Prioress Mill. Residents have endured noise from the works at Prioress Mill for many, many years, probably since the inception, because the Leylandii hedge was planted in the 70s in an effort to reduce the impact of noise on those residences. A pump working at low capacity was what you heard yesterday. And I found it quite interesting because I was standing at the back of the group of colleagues, and I found it extremely difficult to hear what was being said at the front. But this intermittent noise has a real impact on your life. Planning Policy Wales states that infrastructure which is poorly designed or badly located can exacerbate problems rather than solve them. And if you refer to the Environmental Health Officer's report on 415, it says they potentially significantly improve. Doesn't say will do, says potentially. This is relating to the noise, remember. However, please note, in my view, there will be the potential for noise, particularly from the 8. We weren't shown where the 8 extract fans were located on the drawings, regrettably. They actually point south, which is directed towards the residences. The extract fans on the southern facade to be audible at times at the nearby dwellings, especially during evening, night hours as background sound levels go down. Those extract fans are ludicrously located. I can see no reason why they cannot be relocated elsewhere. The defence against any action used to prevent or counteract the effects of the nuisance, potentially improve, it's rather like shutting the door after the horse has bolted, isn't it? That's the defence against any action. It was a bit like we did the best job, but it wasn't good enough. Best practicable means to locate to locate 8 extract fans towards where people live is not acceptable good design in my mind. The scheme is necessary. It's an old setup there. It needs improvement. This aspect of it, those 8 fans pointing down towards residences, is not acceptable. Good design would take them onto the west side, and I'm sorry if Dŵr Cymru are employing agents who cannot see a better way to design this facility. It is much to be regretted. So thank you, members, for listening, and I do support the scheme in its totality, but particularly this, and hoping that Natural Resources Wales are fully aware of all impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. There's no here from Llanbadarch Community Council, but I believe we have the objector wishes to speak. Please state your name, and I've given the discretion that you have 6 minutes to speak, seeing that the objectors did a presentation at the last planning committee.
Thank you.
The applicant, sorry.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can I just check that you can hear me clearly? Thanks. I'm Richard Whiteman, and I'm representing the local objections to this proposal. After 25 years of active professional and private lobbying to decrease this site's environmental impact, no one more than I wants this site to be redeveloped. So why then am I here representing mass local objection? Well, because while the proposal is good for wildlife, it's awful for people. And let's be very clear, we're only objecting to the specific design solution that Welsh Water, or rather its wholly commercial engineering partners, have chosen for this site, and not the existence of the facility as such. What we are working against is illustrated by a quote from the applicant at a public consultation meeting in December last year. You have to understand, this is going to happen. It's in the overriding public interest. Do you have any thoughts about the colour you would like it painted? Some consultation. The planning record shows that the proposed design had actively ruled out of scope the local community, visual and landscape impact, architectural input, the history of noise complaints, the presence of listed buildings, the presence of flood defences immediately downstream, and the risk of flooding from runoff. Nor did it even mention the well-being of Future Generations Act. The proposed buildings are unnecessarily tall, massive and visually intrusive, twice as tall and 3 times bigger than the existing buildings. And note, for 99.9% of the time, the increased volume will be merely empty airspace. It's only needed very occasionally for space to lift pumps out for servicing. Yes, most reluctantly, Welsh Water has agreed to add some exterior cladding, but the essential problems with the building remain, dead and dying planted trees included. Their decision to abandon a less impactful 6.4 metre high design relates to their choice to move to fewer but bigger, noisier pumps. Welsh Water claims but refuses to evidence that decision to be best available technique, BAT. It has even refused to comply with an Environmental Information Regulations inquiry, an EIR, effectively an environmental FOI, to clarify the options analysis around this decision. They give the commercial confidence of their commercial engineering partners as the reason. Last month, they told you the reason for the change was simply lack of space. It sort of doesn't add up. Now, here's the thing. The judicial review that clarified that all water companies are subject to EIR was made in relation to a claim against Welsh Water for refusing to release information to an NGO about the impact of this very site, in effect a precursor to this redevelopment proposal. Welsh Water claims that their solution is the only one available to it, but yet again it is not willing to prove that. In fact, in 2014, they started an alternative project to install new fish screens as the only work required to meet the new abstraction licence. At that time, they were happy to carry on indefinitely with the existing pumps and so on. No consideration whatsoever was given to soundproofing. Major sound emitters, which cannot be relocated, have been designed facing towards nearby residents. Yes, they have most reluctantly agreed to retrofit some soundproofing after highly dubious, clandestinely executed surveys that, quite incredibly, show no difference between noise levels between day or night. And even they admit the work is of unknown effectiveness, as it is being fitted around immovable design features. At the site visit yesterday, Arcadis demonstrated how the smallest breach in soundproofing transmits a lot of noise, so nicely proving our point about the retrofitted solution and the problems with it. The new water intake had been designed without any flood or scour effects modelling. Yes, there has been some modelling since, but it is vague and retrospective and therefore very questionable. Look at the poor quality and the inconsistency between the various misleading illustrations and diagrams in the handout they gave you, a planning committee, yesterday. I'm sorry, but that's typically sloppy work. So what are we asking you to do? Well, clearly we urge you to reject this application. The material reasons we suggest are: building locations, dimensions and profiles have been consistently vague and misrepresented. No one can be really certain about what they will be approving. It is avoidably too big and much more intrusive than necessary. Remember, 99% of the time it will be void space. Does not meet best available technique around noise reduction or visual intrusion. It only offers Heath Robinson retrofitted solutions of unknown efficiency. The noise condition suggested by MCC is weak and most likely unenforceable. After all, best available technique will have been accepted and £29 million spent. It is nowhere near proven to be the least impactful solution available to Welsh Water. In fact, they actively refuse to prove that. And it remains as a potentially significant threat to local flood defences. On more fundamental issues, it has no proven, and I stress proven, overriding public interest argument to justify its impact. And very importantly, it is not supported by the necessary levels of transparency and accountability around decision-making for a public body project. Put bluntly, how can you be reasonably certain that the design is the best all-around solution available rather than just the easiest, most profitable one for Arcadis and Skanska? And it does not comply with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Regrettably, and I say regrettably, I think MCC staff have not asked themselves enough, where is the proof around the claims made by the applicant? And they have too readily accepted at face value, unsubstantiated and easily challenged contention around public interest, best available technique, best all-round solution, etc. I am asking you to protect our community's well-being and redress this mistake.
Could you please wind up, Mr. Whiteman?
The planning record supports all I have said. The applicant is about to have the final say for 4 minutes, and I suspect they'll say things like, there's a strategic risk of failure to water supply if the plant is not replaced immediately. Where's their proof? The new plant must be commissioned by December 28 to meet the new NRW licence. Not so. NRW confirmed they would be happy to set back the start date to secure the best outcome. The building is best available technique. How can it be? How can an oversized, mostly empty industrial plant designed without any reference to its host community be best available technique?
Thank you, Mr. Whiteman. I'm afraid I can't give you any more time.
No, I finished.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We now have a spokesman for the applicant. Could you please state your name, and you'll have 4 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Hennessy. I'm the Director of Capital Delivery for Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water. Thank you for giving me some opportunity to speak this afternoon. You've heard a lot of technical details, and I don't tend to cover those either for or against in terms of what you've heard today. But I thought it would be useful for me to set the context as to why Dŵr Cymru are investing in a new raw water pumping station at Prioress Mill. The existing pumping station at Prioress Mill was built in 1960s. It was to enable water to be pumped from the River Usk to the Langdegford Reservoir. Langdegford Reservoir has no alternative supply of water. It will not fill from a natural catchment. It's reliant on the water coming from Prioress Mill to be able to be filled. The investment was made in 1960 to meet a supply-demand need for Cardiff and the valleys and the surrounding catchments. And that need exists today. It is part of the critical national infrastructure and a key asset in Wales to enable us to supply water effectively. Over 600,000 customers are reliant on Prioress Mill feeding water across to Langdegford for their supply of water, both now and into the future. As you've heard, the existing pumping station is coming to the end of its design life. The structure is deteriorating, it is becoming unreliable, and actually it won't meet some of the environmental factors that Philip and the team talked about earlier in terms of its existence. There's been quite a bit of discussion about Welsh Water have made the right decision. Welsh Water are a not-for-profit organisation owned by our customers, and we're accountable to our customers to make good investment decisions. We have a duty to safeguard water supplies, not just for now, but for future generations. And I believe in the team that designed this is the best option for achieving that. And it's a good design, a good solution to problem, and it will actually sustain a reliable water supply for the next 60 years for the future generations of Wales. We're investing 23 million in the new pumping station. Again, Welsh Water does not make that level of investment decision without scrutiny through our capital programme board and through reviews internally and externally in terms of the solution that's been picked. We have supplied information on alternatives that we looked at, but there was some commercially sensitive information in that which we did withhold. We have worked with all the statutory consultees. We have amended this design on a number of occasions. There are no objections outstanding, as you heard from the planning officers earlier. We have listened to local residents and communities, and we have tried to alleviate their concerns by designing a pumping station that we feel fits into the natural environment, and we know it will be a reduction in noise levels from the current station. In terms of noise, it will be under the British standard, it has a low impact assessment in terms of noise for the new station that we're going to install. We recognise the sensitive habitat that we're installing the works in. We've not taken it lightly. We've taken all appropriate measures to ensure that we protect species and the environment as we go through the construction process. If our approval is granted, we'll work with local communities to ensure that we minimise disruption. You've heard some of the steps we've taken already to look at reducing disruption to local residents in terms of putting a new road in, but we'll continue to work with the communities to ensure that we will fulfil that requirement. Prioress Mill is part of our critical national infrastructure in Wales. Over 600,000 customers are reliant on the supply for their water supply. Welsh Water has a duty to make investment decisions that are right for our customers now, but also right for future generations. And we firmly believe the new pumping station at Prioress Mill is the right solution for both our customers and the environment. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hennessy. Right, I'd wish now for comments from the committee. I believe most of us were there yesterday. So, Councillor Murphy, to start, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And can I start by saying that, particularly having been there yesterday, I've got a considerable amount of sympathy for the residents' point of view. You've only got to look around you to see why they're concerned about this. And I think it's fair to say, and our last speaker has just alluded to it, that perhaps the original application wasn't as robust as it could have been. And there's an awful lot of work gone on, and all of our officers, from whatever aspect, are now satisfied with it. The difficulty I have with the overall objections to the scheme are that the new building is considerably further away from existing properties than the existing. yes, it's very large, but I'm no engineer, but I can understand that you sometimes have to have a building larger than what's in it, because when you're doing something, you need the space. You can't alter the roof just because you need to do something. But it is set well back, it's purpose-built, it's better insulated. I would understand from what we've just been told that in the event that that there was some noise in the end that could be mitigated, further measures would be taken. So the relocation, I think, will help a lot. There could be river issues, but that's a matter between Welsh Water and National Resources Wales, and it isn't a planning issue as far as I can see. And I know there's a problem with honey fungus there, but discussions with our tree officer advises me that there are mitigating measures that can be taken there. And again, I don't think that would be a planning issue as such, although the death of those trees would obviously cause a screening issue which would have to be addressed. So from a planning point of view, rather than an emotional point of view, I can't see any reason why we can't support this application, so I shall be voting for its approval.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just puzzling about one thing. I can understand, and I sympathise with the residents about the noise of the pumping going on, but the issue of flooding intrigues me, because if you're pumping water from the river up to the reservoir, it's not going on the ground anywhere there. So I can't see that it would add to the flooding. And if we're planting more trees, and everybody knows that trees absorb water at quite a high rate, so I wonder if somebody can explain to me why there's worry about flooding.
Mark, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, Chair, my understanding is from what the other neighbour resident explained yesterday, excuse me, the flooding concerns to do with the extraction, and what he's concerned about is scour from the water being extracted and that eroding the flood defences that he's put in. That was what I understood. Again, not my technical area of expertise, but obviously there's clearly water being extracted at the moment. So that process is happening. It's being relocated slightly. But I'd agree with Councillor Murphy that there would be separate measures legislating for that and protecting residents from that. But that's what I think the concern was regarding in terms of flooding.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Harris, then Councillor Webb, then Councillor Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is obviously of vital importance, particularly to 600,000 people who live in Cardiff, and one way or another, a scheme such as this has to be put in place to replenish the reservoir. And we see before us a scheme that we're told on all the paperwork that we've got here will do the job. And we've heard from Mr. Whiteman in particular that not that it won't do the job, but there is maybe a better way of doing it. But we're here on what we have before us, and I, for one, have always taken notice of what professionals in their working environment tell me is a correct solution to a problem. And in the absence of any absolute counter arguments, I'm not in a position to judge any other way. It's absolutely vital that this facility gets built. It is larger, and we know the reasons why it's larger than the existing facility. It is further away from affected properties, and we hear quite plainly that the noise levels from this scheme will be lower. There are noise levels there at the moment because there is an existing scheme there at the moment. So there will be continuing noise levels, but we were told that they're going to be less intrusive than what already exists. So, from what I've heard so far, just slightly digressing, we keep talking about the well-being of future generations. We unfortunately are in a position here of, if you like, putting the well-being of the local residents against the well-being of many hundreds of thousands of people elsewhere who desperately need a water supply. From what I've read here, I have to go along with Councillor Murphy, and I will be putting my hand up for approval of this scheme. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Webb now, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Just one thing, even though it's probably in the report about the working hours directive, I would like it as a condition, please, the working hours that we agree, please. Thank you. In respect of all the residents that live quite near, I think it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Harris?
Sorry, Madam Chair. One of the things that I did notice from Val's speech was the fans, and I meant to bring that up. Is there any possibility, and these are obviously very contentious, and if they are facing the way they are, is there any possibility that they can be moved? I'm just assuming there isn't, because any sensible person would have done it, but can that be explored?
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Could I have a comment, please, from one of the officers? Especially on the
I understand that has been looked at by Welsh Water or the consultants. I think additional screening has been put up in the form of I think it's an acoustic screen. Is that right? Yeah. I'm just I'm not the case officer on it, so I haven't got the absolute detail of this, but I understand there's an acoustic screen going up in front of it. So it has been looked at. I don't think it was practical to actually move them around to the western elevation as suggested, but ultimately the scheme has been found to be acceptable on a noise basis. It's reducing the current outputs from the site, so in planning terms, that is an acceptable approach. So that's why we've recommended approval for it, and there's no objection from environmental health.
Also, while we've just keep it up to date on who's asking what, the comments on Councillor Webb on working hours, is that in there?
We could impose a condition to control that, as Councillor Webb's requested. Yeah, it's normally covered by environmental health, but we can add that on.
Just remind me what they are, please.
I'll come back to you later on that when he's checked it. Right, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think I definitely agree with the working hours, because I can remember when we had the first presentation, it seemed extremely long and didn't take account of residents' concerns. Some of the issues that residents have raised don't seem to have been adequately covered in the report, as far as I can see. There's been issues, obviously, with regard to the height of the building, and I mean, we were told that on site that this would be multiple buildings. Now that seemed to be a bit of an exaggeration to me, to have multiple buildings when there's only one there at present time. One of the issues is obviously raised in relation to noise. Now it seems to me as the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act says that a prosperous Wales requires the efficient use of resources. Now, to me, if the Water Board are spending millions on a new pumping station, then why on earth, in the original design, wasn't proper soundproofing considered? And shouldn't we look for the best practical means and basically reject this application on the grounds that a better design could presumably be provided, which didn't have these issues of the fans in the wrong direction. I believe it's not, I would have thought it wasn't impossible to actually do that, because it seems to me as if soundproofing of the original building itself can be considered, and I haven't seen any report here to mention about integral soundproofing design of the actual building itself. If somebody can point out to me where that is, that's fair enough. Another issue I think that is of concern is to do with the flood defences, because apparently the river is going to be narrowed, and this will result in faster flowing water. Now, to me, faster flowing water will obviously result in more erosion. And again, this particular issue doesn't seem to have been dealt with adequately. You know, what the current flood defences are and how this will be improved. If this is an issue for National Resources Wales, I am concerned about that, because I know in my own ward that National Resources Wales have not been monitoring a site properly, and that doesn't give me the reassurance. I would like to see much more detail with regard to the flooding side, which I don't think has been covered. Now, in terms of the Wellbeing Future Generations Act, you do have to have an efficient use of resources, and I don't think that if the design originally hasn't included soundproofing, then I would have thought that it should have done. So there's quite a few issues there that I don't feel have been adequately dealt with, and on a best practical method, which is a defence under the Environmental Protection Act 1990, if the residents have to take an action for noise nuisance. I'm not sure that the integral design has actually included that, because there's no mention of that at all in the report. I'm also concerned about the disparity in information that we've just been given, because the applicant actually said that this was a 1960s pumping system, and we were told by the officer that it needed replacing because it was 35 years. By my calculation, from 1960 to now is a little bit more than 35 years. So again, was there an efficient use of the up-to-date resources at that particular time? So I think that it's something that we can look at further, and I don't think these issues have been adequately dealt with in this particular report.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Becker?
Thank you, Chair. I think, for me, it seems like saying that best practice has been followed in this is a complete misnomer. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had to bolt things on retrospectively for noise abatement. But taking it as a planning issue, I personally think that using the vagaries of the Wellbeing Act to say that it is an inappropriate building is incorrect. So could we have a better solution? I think we could, but is there anything material in this proposal on which I can actually say, no, we shouldn't approve this? I would have to say no. I think I'd have to say that we can approve this as it is an acceptable structure for the task.
Councillor Dovey, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It does seem to me that there's a touch of dragging somebody kicking and screaming to find a better solution. I would have thought that an organisation such as this would have invested a lot more effort in ensuring that what they put there was right for the job before it was put in front of the public, if you like, or indeed us. I've listened to everything that is said, and I do have concerns about this pumping station, but my concerns are to do with the water they take out, and the fact that most things nowadays is water is like electricity. It's all in series, and it's a knock-on thing. And if you take more out here, you've got to take more out somewhere else. And the repercussions at the end of the line are significant. But that isn't a planning application. So I reluctantly don't think I can refuse this. Although every bone in my body says I should, I don't think what is on offer here we can refuse. I just think it's the best of it isn't even the best of a poor job, but it looks as if it is being made satisfactory in planning terms.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Councillor Giles Howard next, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A few issues, and I'm inclined to agree with Louise. I can't imagine there are many people in the room who don't understand the need to replace the plant and that it's aging. However, it's still a sensitive location at the valley bottom. The biggest issue for me is the scale of the building, and I haven't seen anything in the report or the correspondence or from Mr. Hennessy's introduction at the start of the meeting about why that extra 4 metres of height is necessary. And to my mind, without that justification, the visual harm isn't warranted. Second issue, the matter of the landscaping. I see the montages there and how it's expected to look in 15 years' time, which is great. Obviously, a lot of the tree planting scheme will have come to maturity and will be extremely effective. 15 years is a long time to wait if you're looking at it, and given its position next to the Usk Valley Walk. And I wonder if a little bit more thought could have been given to doing something that would advance that protection. I mean, did anybody consider doing some larger landscaping by way of a bund with planting on top? The noise levels, mention's been made of the fans pointing towards the dwellings. Why couldn't they have been relocated? Surely it's only a matter of ducting to another side. Okay, the noise levels might be acceptable in terms of our environmental health officers, but why not make it better than acceptable? Also, what worries me is the lack of information about the erosion of riverbanks and the potential scour. I'd like to know a bit more about that. My conclusion is that there are just a few too many unknowns or things that I'm uneasy about at this stage for me to be able to put my hand up for it. So if anybody wants to second it, I'd recommend deferring the application for those issues to be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Phil, do you wish to comment, or Mark?
Chair, if I may, I was just going to come back, because there seem to be quite a few concerns about things that the members feel that they don't know. But in terms of the scour, that is, and the levels of water extraction, as Councillor Dovey said, that's something that's governed by NRW, isn't within our remit. The extraction's taking place now anyway. It's something that they govern, so it's not something that we can control or should try and control. Because we explained before, we can't duplicate other people's controls. We have to trust those other organisations to do what they're doing under their remits. So again, notwithstanding Councillor Brown's experience, we have to trust that NRW is doing what it's meant to be doing. We can't step in and try and do their job for them. In terms of noise, again, there seems to be concern that it's all somehow been retrofitted. My understanding is that certainly isn't the case. The building's been designed with noise in mind and with residential amenity in mind, but there has been to and fro with our environmental health colleagues who were concerned about noise and asked for additional surveys and additional information, and as a result there has been extra screening imposed. So it isn't that it's been designed without any regard to it and then someone's come along and thought, oh, let's make do. It's been an ongoing process to get the scheme up to EH's requirements and standards. Again, linked in with the wellbeing of future generations, as Councillor Harris said, it is about balancing not just the immediate locality but the bigger picture. There will be harm to the residents in terms of noise, but the advice we're given is it will be better than the current situation. So in terms of reason for refusal, what would that be? There is no noise harm that's worse than current. So I applaud the ambition for getting the best scheme possible, but regrettably that isn't actually the test we have to work to. We're looking at material harm in a planning sense that we can stand by in a planning appeal. And my advice to you is nothing's been identified from the discussion or the other presentations that leads me to conclude there is a reason for refusal we can substantiate. That's all the overview of those points, Chair. Really briefly though, the working hours are in the documents as 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Friday and 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Saturday. Nothing Sundays, nothing bank holiday Mondays.
Thank you. Is that all right, Councillor Webb?
You need me to repeat that?
Something like that.
Right. You have 2 minutes, Councillor Smith.
Yes, it does. A potential problem's been identified. It isn't a potential problem. We've got a problem there with noise now, and we are, Monmouthshire County Council, planning is considering, it's okay, it doesn't matter about our residents. It does matter about our residents. Good design resolves issues. I'm sorry that Dŵr Cymru have taken such a laid-back sort of attitude. I really am. An acoustic screen. You could plant a line of trees and call it an acoustic screen. I really, really ask members to put an additional condition, if you're going to give consent, and listening here, I think you probably are, to seek further negotiations with Dŵr Cymru, for them to see that they need to do right by the residents who live there. Not to just say, and if you look at the environmental officer's response, it's a qualified comment, that he's actually saying a defence against any action. Therefore, he's saying, I got a problem here, I can see us having problems in the future. Please put a condition in, if you're going to approve, seeking additional consultations with Dŵr Cymru. Go to your design firm, ask them to bring forward a better scheme to do right by the residents who put up with so much over the years and which we, as a council, are seeming to endorse for future generations. I'm sorry, I feel very strongly about it. Our residents don't matter. Yes, I know there's a lot of them up the valleys and down in Cardiff, and they matter as well. But equally well, our folks in Prioress Mill matter. And we should be more caring of our communities, as we say in our literature.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. The officers wish to comment at all on that?
Chair, I need to say we're not saying that local residents don't matter at all. We're just saying it has to be balanced as part of the bigger picture. But you've heard all the debate, so I'll shut up.
Right, thank you. Councillor Murphy, I believe you moved approval, and it was seconded by Councillor Harris. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
That's 9 for approval, Chairman.
Those for refusal?
3 against.
And I abstained.
Therefore, Chairman, just for the record, planning permission is granted on that. There were 9 votes for, 3 against and 2 abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming in today. The lights go off there. The lights. We now go to page 63 to 60. Sorry, Councillor Webb.
Councillor Louise has just reminded me that we didn't really have any debate on the working hours, and it is quite important. I know that it's been it's going to be 7 till 7. I know, as a condition, 7 till 7, is it?
Chair, I've taken the decision as including that extra condition the committee discussed. So 7 till 7,
Okay. And is it a
8 till 1 on a Saturday.
Howard?
One of the recommended conditions includes a construction management plan, which suggests that working hours is a matter for discussion, and I think 7 till 7 is excessive.
I do as well. I wasn't allowed a discussion on that before we went to the vote, and I would have liked to, I did put my hand up, and I would have liked to have suggested 8 till 7 rather than 7 till 7.
The decision's made.
Actually clarify that point, I don't believe, when the vote was taken.
Right, we'll debate. Shall we say 8 till 7? Are you in agreement with 8 till 7 if nobody's in favour of 7 till 7? Sorry, Councillor Harris.
We have to think, as has just been mentioned, sound and conditions. If we alter the hours and shorten the hours, the residents are going to have much longer disturbance. We need to think about that as well. You know, if you halve the hours, it takes twice as long.
Thank you.
I said if you halve the hours, it takes...
In the hours, we're just taking one. Well, don't exaggerate.
Right, thank you. I think it's been agreed. Could I have a show of hands from 7 till 7 then and see how we get on with that? Right, it has been carried. It will be from 7 till 7. Thank you. Go on to the... And that's on page 63 to 66, and this is in Monmouth, and it is 00707. Thank you. And Phil, I believe you're presenting this.
Thank you. Yeah, again, this was one we looked at yesterday. That's the old Clark shop on Mono Street, and the proposal is to replace that, that sort of, if I can call it, dual-fronted, dual-opening frontage to the shop front there with a design which is, that's the existing shop front. So as you know, you can come in, and then there was the recessed doorway further back in, and then there was the sort of loop with this central panel here as well. So the idea is to replace that with a more traditional, if I can call it that, shop front, which would have the recessed doorway in one area here, and then a frontage along here. So you're losing that sort of recessed area there. So with one inset doorway. It's been designed, it's over there. There have been negotiations with our heritage officer. The existing fascia is much higher and actually obscures the bottom of the first floor windows. And you can't see the sills on the existing scheme. If we look at that, it's actually up like that. So we feel this is a better shop front, it's better balanced, it's a lower fascia, so it's more in proportion with the actual facade. It's a traditional design. It's been designed by a well-respected local architect from Monmouth, and we feel it's an entirely appropriate design, and we don't feel that the existing shopfront is of that much merit to actually warrant its retention, and that's the view also of our expert heritage officer, qualified conservation architect. So we would recommend approval for that replacement, as shown in that drawing there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have somebody from Monmouth Town Council who wishes to speak on the application. Could you state your name, and you have 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sue McConnell, councillor for Monmouth Town Council. I'll be as brief as I can. When I left my office where I work to come here this afternoon, the administrator who lives in Cwmbran asked me what I was doing. So I told her what I was doing, and she said, "Oh no," she said, "the shop with a lovely bit where you go in and out." No, she said, "Save it." Now, she goes to Monmouth Town regularly from Cwmbran at weekends with her family for the charm of the high street, for the small independent shops, the attractive and varied architecture, to eat out and to eat out. She's an absolute classic destination shopper, which is so crucial to Monmouth Town Centre, and for whom irregular quirks of architecture are a crucial part of the offer. When this application appeared on the agenda for Monmouth Town Council Planning Committee, there was a similar sort of gut response, really, and we lodged a recommendation of refusal on the basis of that. There have been a couple of defences of objections put up to our objection, if you like, which is that that we need to fill the shop. Well, this is in fact a move of shops from one shop in Monmouth to another. So one will close when this one opens. There's been objections about the I think it's called that recessed entryway being a health hazard because it frankly is used as a toilet of a Friday night. But that's perfectly surmountable by a gate. It's nothing that pragmatic solutions can't be exercised on. The question which exercised us was, would the applicant consider amending their plan to accommodate retaining that existing in-out-y, I think it's called an arcade entry, technically. One of our number from that meeting was delegated to make inquiries of the applicant as to whether it would be feasible, whether they would consider amending their plans to keep this feature at the front. But he was subsequently advised, I think from here, that it would not be appropriate in advance of the application being considered for the Town Council to start negotiating with the applicant. So our only recourse is to bring it here under our recommendation of what is effectively a provisional refusal. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. I believe... Okay. I believe you wish to speak. I know you've been speaking on behalf of the... it isn't the Town Council, though, that you speak of.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce.
Right, thank you.
David Cummings, Chairman of Monmouth and District Chamber of Trade and Commerce. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen and members of the Planning Committee. I'd like to thank the Chair for permission to speak in support of this application. As councillors will know from their visit, the Old Clark Shop occupies a dominant position in Monroe Street, Monmouth, and thus its closure has negatively affected the shopping experience of locals and visitors for the last 3 years, and as with many long-term empty buildings, has now been vandalised. At 3,500 square foot, the shop and store is above the size normally occupied by independents, and they would also be deterred by the £50,000 rent and probably £25,000 rates. We are aware that 5 major retailers have walked away from the property due to the listed staircase and the frontage issues. An opportunity has now arisen for an existing national retailer, Specsavers, to move to these larger premises. Because 25 Monroe Street has no rear access, it must be serviced from the front by delivery lorries. Most national retailers will have large lorries delivering possibly daily, which will cause traffic disruption at this narrow point in Monroe Street. Specsavers only have one small delivery van per week. Thus, Specsavers seem the ideal and possibly only potential tenant for the property at this time. Yes, the Town Council Planning Committee did turn down the application, but the report that I received from the meeting was that 3 were in favour and 3 against, and the Chair had the casting vote and decided to vote against. 3 councillors on the committee chose not to attend that meeting, so there could have been a different outcome. I believe one councillor on the Town Council Planning Committee stated that there would still be an empty shop even if Specsavers moved. After more than a decade of experience of the retail sector in Monmouth, I can say that their old small shop, due to its prime position and size, should let very quickly and probably to an independent. The architects have made changes to the planned frontage to take account of some criticisms. The case officer, in her report to the committee, emphasises that the building is part of our primary shopping frontages and that the changes to the frontage will make the building more in keeping with the rest of the street. I believe it's essential this property is let in the short term, as from October new tenants will have to be found for the NatWest building, and 2 large empty retail premises in our high street will have a major negative impact on the shopper's experience. The loss of banks and building society is happening across many market towns, and Monmouth is not immune. Yorkshire Building Society closed in May, and NatWest is soon to follow. In conclusion, It has taken 3 years of negotiation and promotion by the commercial estate agents to find a new tenant for the empty shop in town. The empty shop in town that has been unoccupied for the longest period in my memory. If this planning application is not allowed, then our high street will continue to be blighted by a large empty shop. In these times of uncertainty with Brexit, we need to welcome retailers with open arms to our town centre. A vote to refuse this application will give a message to inward investors that Monmouth is not open for business. I have stood up before you over the last 2 years in support of a dozen applications. This one ranks with importance to the town with the Spa Hotel and the Premier Inn. Our retailers need a high street that provides an attractive shopping experience to survive. Please support this application. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummins. I believe there is nobody for the applicant.
I don't think the applicant has arrived.
Right. Oh, right. Thank you. So, right, we'll go into committee. Monmouth Town. I will take the councillors from Monmouth Town first. Councillor Feakin.
Thank you, Chair. This is a Marmite application. There's no doubt about it. Some people will be for it, and some people will be against it. What we're looking at there isn't the building's original form. It's got RSJs behind that facade. The construct, the arcade construct, I would say, is a 1970s construct. So it's not something more older.
I will like to admit that as a child, that facade was very much like that then, many, many years ago when it was Gowers and then it became Millwoods. It was a very well sought after dress shop and haberdassery for many, many years. And then it became the shoe shop, which was Millwoods for many years as well. So the actual construction, you should say, with their RSJs in there, but I should think that was because of the old condition of the building. Nothing to do with design, it was always like that.
Thank you, Chair. So you as a child, so I take that back to the 1960s, I guess.
Touché.
But it's not. I mean, the heritage value of Monmouth High Street is much older than 1950s, 60s, or 70s, or whatever. It goes back much more in time. So I can understand the principles of design of wanting to take it back to something more original and more in keeping with the high street. Like I say, for me, it's a Marmite application. I either do like this or you don't like it. There will be some local people that adore it and some local people that don't like it at all. Going back to what David Cummins said from the Chamber of Commerce, I've known that building to be empty for a very long period of time. It is in the pinch point of the town centre. It is where everyone drives past. I think we as a town should do everything we can possible to accommodate the occupation of that building. And so for that reason, I support the officer's recommendation to approve this scheme on the basis that we do need that shop to be filled. And if this is what it takes for that shop to be filled, then that's what I think we should do. So I recommend for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Yes, I think we can all be rather romantic about things and not like change. But the thing is, it's as the one councillor from the town stated, you will have, if it's only a move from Specsavers from one side of the street to the other, we will now have 3 or 4, I believe, opticians in Monmouth, and not a shoe can you buy in Monmouth for any school child when you've got so many schools there. So it was very sad that Millwoods vacated the shop as well. But that's a different issue altogether. But as you said, it's been empty a long time. Who was the next one? Councillor Brown now, I think, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, going on the site visit, I do appreciate there was the the endearing nature of the arcade type of structure, but we did also notice that there was a bit of vandalism behind it when we were on site, and I think in this case, because the top bit of the structure does have the architectural features as opposed to the bottom, I would be in favour of a pragmatic solution here and support Councillor Feakin's second his approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, well, while some people might think it's it's a substantial change to what is there, it's only small in nature, and that type of entrance is not conducive to customers going into shops these days, not in my view anyway. And I support the two previous members in their comments, and I fully support the change.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maureen Powell.
Yes, thank you. On looking at it from a business point of view, if people want to sell something, they want the public to see as much of their goods as possible. And with the alterations now, you're going to have a much wider shop front, which is much conducive to selling things. And this is what we have to do in this day and age. I think the time's gone when we have the people sort of wandering around and gazing in. They need to see it out the front, and I support this application.
Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Chair. I've been constantly impressed by the vibrancy of Monmouth High Street. They're bucking a trend in the modern age. I think that they know what they're doing in terms of opening up these shop fronts. I think that the quirky nature of the High Street is actually best represented by the architecture above the shop front, and we'll actually see more of that. I think that'll improve the aesthetic along the High Street rather than diminish it. And our Heritage Department, I've got full faith in them if they say that actually from a heritage standpoint there's no need to retain the feature. I think that we should definitely support.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. Anybody? Oh, Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I take the point about the antisocial aspects of the design. It takes up an awful lot of retail space, which is not conducive these days. The smaller unit being vacated, I would have thought would be easier to let. I support David Cummins' view on that. So I'd be happy to move approval.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I probably remember back farther than most people, and I'm not going to say how far back, but it has been like that for a long time. I think it's quite sad, actually, because it is quirky by nature. And in actual fact, if you look at the area of glass that would be exposed for display, it's going to be smaller now because it's flat straight across, and rather than in the arcade, which had a sales area in the middle of it where you could look in through the back and look in through the front. So it was quirky. I'm sorry it's lost some. I'm glad the fascia is smaller because you get more sight of the upper two stories. But I think it's lost a bit of the symmetry if you have a look at that as it is now. Maybe it's the green. The fact that it's outlined in green on that slide makes it look slightly different, but I think it's lost a bit of the symmetry. But I do understand what people are saying is what appears to be rotten teeth in public high streets is not a good thing, and you need to have as many of these shops occupied as you possibly can, or you get into this situation where you have lots of charity shops. I'm not against charity shops, but that isn't a proper retail offer, if you like, or betting shops. So I think we have to accept the fact that this is the best option that we're likely to get. One would have hoped it would have been a proper retail shop rather than a specialist shop like an optician's. But if that is the best that the town can attract, then so be it.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Councillor Webb.
Yes, Chair, my concern is where are we going to shelter when it rains?
Councillor Feakin has moved approval, and I believe you had a seconder with Councillor Powell. Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown. I do beg your pardon. A show of hands for approval, please.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Right. Thank you all very much. The next application is on page 73 to 78, and 00761 and Abergavenny, the Hereford Road, Abergavenny. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks permission for the redevelopment of an existing sales kiosk at the Esso filling station at 5 Hereford Road, Abergavenny. The new extended building would require the access to the existing car wash to be pushed back, utilising a small amount of vacant land to the rear, which would also provide 3 staff parking bays. So if you could move on to the, that's photographs of the site. That is the access road that will be pushed back into the vacant land behind that existing fence. And there's a plan showing the proposal. All pumps and tanks would remain as existing. Although the site is outside the central shopping area, it is close to it and has an existing well-established retail use. The existing shop is small and cramped inside. It relies primarily on passing motorists who purchase fuel, and this will remain the primary purpose of the site. Even enlarged, it is unlikely to draw significant customers away from the shops in the central shopping area due to the reduced range of goods available. The proposal will still allow for reasonable distances of separation between the proposal and the adjacent residential properties, ensuring there will be no unacceptable harm to the amenities of these properties. The redeveloped shop has an appropriate design for this type of redevelopment, and the car park will utilise vacant land. With regard to access and parking, there's no alteration to the current access onto the A40. It's anticipated that customer numbers will increase. However, the traffic assessment shows that there will be an anticipated increase in traffic movements by 2% on weekday peak periods and 2.6% during Saturday peak period. It is therefore considered there will be no significant impact on the highway network and no objection on highway grounds. The creation of a formal car park will remove the current ad hoc parking on the forecourt, which could often block access to the HGV pump, vacuum and air services. An external plant compound area is planned on the western part of the proposed extension. No details have been submitted, however, a condition is recommended to require these details to be provided and approved prior to their use to protect the amenity of the neighbours. So officers therefore recommend approval of this application, subject to the conditions outlined in the report.
Thank you for the report, Paula. I believe Councillor Grocott wishes to speak on the application. Is this your ward, Councillor Grocott, or are you just speaking on the Town Council?
Representative of the Town Council.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The view is different from here. I think that there are fundamental flaws in the reasons why the officers have recommended approval. And I think in particular a lack of joined up thinking around wider things that are happening in the immediate vicinity within the town. Your agenda says that the main objection of Abergavenny Town Council is about traffic and egress and access. And that's true. But I think also we did discuss the same view that was taken by the Abergavenny Civic Society, which was around a demonstrable need for this additional shop in any case. I'd refer members to your policy REIT 4, which says that a development outside the defined central shopping area should be assessed against, and the first criteria, a demonstrable need. Well, the demonstration seemed to be that it's only just outside the shopping area. And if you live in the housing that is on both sides of this garage, I don't think you'd find that much of a defence. The reality is that it is outside the central shopping area, and that should be the key thing for you to consider. There is then some very weird thinking, because you've just heard from the officer saying that it is not projected that there will be very much increase in traffic movement if this goes ahead. Well, it seems strange that this is a garage that is seeking to extend, and yet is not expecting many more cars to be using it. That is not demonstrating a need for increased retail outlet, unless, of course, the intention is that people will walk from the central shopping area to the garage to buy their shopping. Now, if we just think about the other retail development 100 metres further on from this spot, you have a huge new supermarket. And if people are walking from town to the garage, I would suggest they will carry on walking that extra 100 metres to go to Morrison's, not to the Esso garage shop. There is another really very important issue that was at the crux of the town council's opposition, and it is about traffic. Morrison's entrance and exit will be on the A40, 100 metres from the traffic lights that guard the entrance to the garage. Up Hereford Road, controlled by lights, you as a planning committee, probably at your next meeting, but certainly very quickly, will be reconsidering the application from Persimmon Homes to build at least 250 houses just up the hill. These two new developments will bring a huge increase in traffic at that very important junction, which I don't need to remind you, is actually a trunk road junction. Now, would it be possible to put up the slide of the site again? Because I think at the very crux of the issue here is a fact that was not shown on any of the photographs you just looked at. The reality is that this site is controlled by 4 traffic lights. 1 on Park Road, the A40, 2 on Hereford Road, and 1 controlling the small lane to the houses that were referred to at the back of the garage. That, by the way, is not the housing I was talking about in terms of existing housing. I was talking about the old people's residences just next door, the old vicarage, and then the housing on the main Hereford Road on the other side of the garage.
Could you please wind up as soon as
Certainly.
possible?
The key point is that you have got a garage here where departure from the site is not controlled by traffic lights. Those 4 lights, none of them affect the exit, and this planning consent says if it's approved, there would be no change to that. You will have people who don't know the site coming out of Morrison's, turning round on a trunk road guarded by lights, and in the middle of that will be a site where people can drive out without any traffic control. That is dangerous, and that is at the heart of the Town Council's objection. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. The nearest councillor would be Councillor Powell, I believe. Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. This type of shop isn't a shop that you're going to go shopping. This is a shop where people who are getting petrol on their way home from work or when they go to work want to pick up a few essentials. And at the moment, it's very crammed in there and they can't do it very well. Oh, sorry. Whoops. The people are picking up few essentials on their way, on their journey, whether it's to home or to work. And I don't think the number of cars is going to be that more. It's just the people that are going to get their petrol and do this at the same time. But there isn't much room inside there, and there are other things which would be useful for that type of customer. And I don't think that it's going to affect traffic. Anybody who pulls out onto a road, whether there's traffic lights or not traffic lights, know they give way to the traffic going along the road. So it doesn't matter whether you have traffic lights or not. You wait, let the main traffic go along and you wait till there's a space. So I don't see that that's going to be a problem with the traffic. And I think this is going to be useful, as I said, for those people who haven't got time to go around and do shopping at the end of their day, who just want to pick up a few essentials. And this is what the purpose of these garage shops are, and they are very useful. I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Harris, then Councillor Becker. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's interesting that the county councillor for the ward is not concerned that this will be a problem. And he mentioned that yesterday on the when we saw him on our site visits. And he's also a town councillor, as am I. I think it's all been said. Nobody is going to go to that place to go shopping. It just would be totally incomprehensible to do that, bearing in mind what is around. As mentioned, Morrison's just up the road. It just won't happen. So it's going to be convenient for those, probably most of who don't live in the town, and it's been mentioned it's on the A40. It's a handy place for people coming from hundreds of miles away. They've got that facility there, although they won't know it until they go in there, but it will be there. As has been mentioned, if it's a traffic hotspot, then it's known that you have to be careful. I'm not too aware there are many accidents, and I don't know of any serious accidents that have occurred there, to be perfectly honest. I don't have a problem with this application.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Becker, then Councillor Dovey.
It's essentially the same thing. I mean, this is about offering existing customers an extra service, not about trying to get in new customers, and about trying to stay competitive with Morrison's opening up the road. They don't want to lose their incidental customers to those people. It's not going to generate a huge amount more traffic, and the dangers won't be any different to the dangers that already exist. And it seems to be working fine at the moment. So I'd move for approval.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Dovey?
Do I have to say that I was involved in this sort of thing before? Is that having a... Okay.
No, Councillor Dovey, you don't have an interest on the basis that
okay.
You earned your living some time ago doing this.
Right. The point is, and Maureen said it, that what you got there is a convenience store, and a convenience store is a convenience store. It is what it says on the bag, if you like. What that will be selling is regular people who start off in the morning. Van man will be going in there buying his cigarettes, buying his milk, buying his bread and whatnot, and flying off with a whole load of stuff. You'll have people who are in cars coming out of their estates and going off on journeys. They will not want to go necessarily into a hypermarket, especially if they're subsidised motorists. About 70% of the population are subsidised motorists, so they'll be going there to put their journey right to go off. So it is very much a one sort of operation. It's a convenience operation. That's why the shops are not allowed to be more than 3,000 square foot if they want to do these things. That's what the planning is all about. The other thing is you get a lot of people, we forget about this, we get a lot of people, elderly people, that don't have cars and don't want to walk to a hypermarket. In fact, that's the last place they want to go to it, because of all the hustle and bustle and everything else. And it's somewhere like this where they can walk to and get small items of shopping. It's an absolute godsend to them. That's why the Crop are building that place up at Rockfield, where we were looking there. There's a market there for local people. The fuel market is taken care of somewhere else. So this is a really good facility for the town. It shouldn't be frowned on. It's going to be better than it is at the moment. It will be
Thank you, Councillor. I think you've made your point. Councillor Giles Howard.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. Have we had a response from Welsh Government Highways since the report was written. I noticed it's awaiting comments. Generally, I'd support it, but it would be helpful to have a view. I think I agree with Councillor Harris that it's not a shopping destination. I've used the site for petrol. It's extremely tight in there. You're lucky to be able to buy a Twix and an air freshener before getting out of the way of the person at the till. It's that small in there. I don't think it's going to pose a threat to the existing retail offer in the town.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Has there been any comment from Highways since the report? No.
No, Chair.
Quickly, please.
Quickly. If you look at it, it's a one-way site. You come in one side, you go out of the other. I've known the site for donkey's years, and you don't get people coming out and turning round to come back the other way. It's very much a one-way site, and it isn't a traffic problem, I would say, at all.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe it's been moved for approval. I believe Mr. Becker moved for approval. Do you have a seconder, please? Councillor Maureen Powell, then. And could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
Unanimous, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. So that's been approved. We now go to page 29. And this is 00122 at Langure Lane. I think that pronunciation is right. Luna. Move. Councillor Giles Howard, you moved approval. And yes, we did indeed. And Councillor Feakin seconded. A show of hands for approval, please.
That's 12 for it, Chairman. Anyone against?
Yes, 2.
2 against. So it's there for approval, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much indeed. We now go to page 39 to 58, and this is the land in Monmouth, and this is 00539. Thank you, Mark. I believe you're presenting this one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Councillor Edwards said, the application's on page 39 of the paper agenda, or I think around about 57 of the electronic one, if you're trying to follow that way. It's an outline plan application for up to 70 dwellings, with all matters reserved apart from the vehicular access. So I'll go through those issues in a minute. As we discussed on site yesterday, probably the most important thing to note is the sites outside of the settlement boundary as identified in the LDP. So we're looking at this as a departure application to the LDP, and the sole reason it's on there with a recommendation for approval relates to our 5-year housing land supply, which I'll come to in a minute. If we just go through some site photos first. This photo is the northeast corner of the site. There's an existing dwelling there with a garden and garage screened by some hedges, and a gate on the corner of the field which will be closed off as part of the developments. This is looking into the sites from Rockfield Road. So on the left there, you can see some existing residential properties. They bound the sites on the southern boundary. Rockfield Road's on the east. The property we just saw is on the north. And there's some adjacent lands and then some more residential property on the Park Lindore site on the west. It's looking up Rockfield Road. So the site is on your left. Anchor Hill Vineyard is just up the road very slightly on your right, and in fact that's probably the entrance to Anchor Hill on the foreground of that photo. It is, I can see the sign. So yeah, Anchor Hill Vineyard is on your right, the proposed site's on your left, and the proposed access is roughly halfway up that hedge line you can see on the left hand side. And again, it's a similar shot, but with a van probably roughly where the access is proposed. If that helps give you some bearings. So that's looking out of Monmouth up into the wider countryside. And again, a view, try and get my bearings there. I think this is looking from the public right of way across the site back towards Rockfield Road. And again, looking across the site, there's the newest housing development in the area, Park Lindore in the background. Same again, slightly blurry.
Yeah.
It's an action shot.
That's the right of way, isn't it?
Okay, so I set out a bit of context there with the photos of where the site's located, and those of you on the site visit yesterday will have seen all of that. So as you can see, it's bounded on the one side by existing houses, the other side by Rockfield Road, 2 existing dwellings to the north of the property, and then just to the northwest on that plan, it's all open countryside, but there is an extant planning permission there for hotel and leisure facilities. It's pretty old planning permission, but it is live because they built the road access, so that still exists. There's no particular indication it's ever going to go any further at the moment, but never say never. The area of land to the left, that's outlined in blue, is owned by the same people. And we've actually got a planning application at the moment for the entire site, red and blue, that came in 2016, and that was for 130 dwellings. That application hasn't proceeded at the moment, it's still with us, but the issue in hand relates to Welsh water and sewage capacity. It's not insurmountable, but it requires some pretty hefty financial investments. So what the applicants have done is come in with a second application just for the bit outlined in red for 70 dwellings, and that's the one we're considering today. Welsh Water's happy there's capacity for 70, so this could be built straight away if committee gives its permission today. It'll need a separate reserve matters consent, and then the applicants would probably set about doing work with Welsh Water, looking at capacity and bring forward the other 60 separately. But the other 60, that would be a separate consent, a separate application that'd be before committee. You'd make a separate decision on that. So we're just asking you to consider 70 today. You're not prejudicing yourselves on any future decision on the rest. So if we go on a plan, I'll talk through the scheme. This housing layout's indicative, but it shows how 70 dwellings could be accommodated on the site with the access top centre onto Rockfield Road. So it's a standard road junction, priority on Rockfield Road, you turn left into the site, or right if you're coming from the north, in a usual format. So it's a simple junction, it's not an arguably over-engineered roundabout like the one further south. The site, in terms of green infrastructure and indicative layouts being drawn up, very much to make sure it works, both if the next door bit of land does come forward and if it doesn't, because we need to make sure it works in either scenario. So you can see on that plan the vehicular access. In terms of that aspect, there's no objections from highways. There's provision that will be included in the Section 278 Highways Agreements to make sure the footpath alongside Rockfield Road is widened, which is something that we discussed on site yesterday because that needs doing. There is a current bus stop which is down by Rolls Close, I think it is, Rolls Avenue, which is about 500 metres south of the site, which is further than we'd normally expect people to walk to a bus stop. We'd normally talk about 400 metres. But there's also a hail and ride service that operates during the week, a pretty decent lengthy hours. And as part of the application, we'd be seeking Section 106 contribution to supplement the existing bus services. Primarily with the detail of the site, in the southeastern corner, there's a drainage area, which is where naturally the water would flow in the sites, although it does raise up very slightly, but that provides both a green infrastructure benefit and a drainage solution for the site for surface water as a means of mitigating that, and there'll be management arrangements around that. Alongside Rockfield Road and to the north of the site, you can see a green area. There's actually a 10-metre buffer for any development, so it'll be really well screened and landscaped in. And then on the southwestern boundary, next to the potential future development parcel, there'll be an area there as a community orchard, community growing area, which would be part of the green infrastructure benefits and part of the adult leisure. Instead of doing some pretty traditional standardised things, we're trying to look at a bit different way in terms of green infrastructure and those kind of provisions. The smaller green area, lighter green rectangle to the southern part of that boundary is a potential future local area of play. But again, we're looking at doing that in different ways. So we're not looking at springy chickens. We're looking at doing a more sensible, rationalised version of play equipment. And also we're looking at what's in the wider area, making that work in the best way possible. You can see some various dotted lines through the site. There's an existing public right-of-way on the southwestern boundary, which we walked along, that links down into the existing residential site to the south. And there's an existing footpath, albeit it didn't look terribly well used when we were there, along the top boundary of the site. I think people probably use the existing access track more so, but that does exist. In terms of green infrastructure and linkage improvements, we're seeking a linkage for pedestrians through east to west in the site, which will link up to the north-south link, and then again longer term through the next parcel of land, linking up to rights of way immediately over the hedge in the existing residential area there. And all of that together offers some real scope for existing and future residents to access the wider countryside. The Park Glyndŵr site in particular is perhaps designed under an older regime where we weren't so mindful of these things, and there's some great opportunities that could come forward with this to link it into Offers Dyke and the wider area. And again, I know Councillor Feakins mentioned yesterday there might be some localised concerns around that, with people being quite happy living at the end of a cul-de-sac. So that's something that we need to bear in mind, but as officers we support those wider opportunities. If I just go back on with the detail and then I come back to the wider principle of development, the access point is round about at the point where the speed limit changes from 30 to 60. Excuse me. So as part of the proposal, the applicants would finance the extension of that 30 mile an hour speed limit to the north, which highways are requested. The access is fine in highways terms. And in terms of other contributions, there's a £10,000 green infrastructure bond, just under £110,000 off-site leisure contribution. There's no future maintenance on site because of the way that will be managed in the future privately. And there's also 35% affordable housing, which is policy compliance. That equates to 25 dwellings. And it sets out in the report the breakdown of those dwellings, which meets with Shirley, our housing officers, requirements for the area. So we'd have to tie that in now at outline stage, even though the exact details of how the development looks and where the houses sit would come in at reserve matters. But we are comfortable it can be developed with acceptable privacy and overlooking distances from the existing houses around, retaining those important wildlife corridors and green features of the hedges, and being done in a really sensitive way, and also having a much softer buffer into the countryside, because at the moment it's a fairly hard edge. So back on probably what's the most critical point, which is the principle of the development. As I said, it's outside of the settlement boundary in the LDP, so the starting point on any of our decisions is a local development plan, and the plan as it stands would say no. What changes that is our 5-year housing land supply. So as you'll have seen from the reports and the link in there, we now have a 4-year housing land supply. 5 years of deliverable and realistically available land is the minimum that we should have, and that's very clear in national planning policy. So we're below that, and national planning policy and guidance in TAN 1 then sets out the approach we need to take if we're below 5. And essentially we need to take a pragmatic approach to sites that are not allocated to deal with that shortfall. So committee's familiar that we've approved one in the past in Llanfoes, the Grove Farm site. We've also refused one in Mountain Road in Chepstow. And the circumstances that we explained then that were different was the Mountain Road site was a green wedge, had that extra layer of protection. And all the appeal decisions are saying essentially LDP is a starting point. That says no. 5-year housing land supply issue. All other things considered would outweigh that and would lead to a yes. Green wedge in Mountain Road example to give back to a no. This is not a green wedge. It is countryside. It is important visually and in landscape terms, but we've considered all of that as part of the application. So where we are as officers is we consider the applications acceptable in planning terms, notwithstanding the initial was outside the LDP settlement boundary. We think the 5-year land supply indicates we should be supporting it, and we've looked at highway safety, residential amenity, green infrastructure, and landscape and the like. I will just mention there was a previous appeal decision from 2014 The scheme, the wider site was put forward for 147 dwellings, and we won the appeal. It was refused on a couple of grounds, one of which was prematurity, because the LDP was about to pop out, and need, and the other one was around landscape harm. The inspector concluded the scheme could be designed in a sensitive way that meant it was acceptable in landscape terms, but we won the appeal because it was literally a month before the inspector's report on the LDP came out. It was considered to be premature at that stage. The LDP was factoring in all the housing land that we needed at the time, and that's the thing that's changed now. It has been raised, really briefly, I'll cover, it has been raised by the town council, I think, and by some residents, that if you look at the 5-year land supply, Monmouth itself is washing its own face, if you like. The sites won't come forward within the planned period by 2021, but the 5-year supply for Monmouth Town in isolation does show those sites coming forward. The key issue around Monmouth is probably the Wannistow Road site. So we've got detailed consent for 340 dwellings, and they're cracking on site. There's around about 110, 140 left, and that bit of land is effectively landlocked until one of the developers puts the construction road in for the next developer to access it. So we're looking at if there's temporary access solutions around that, but as things stand, that site's not going to come forward before the tail end of 2020. So that site is not really going to make a contribution in the planned period. Notwithstanding the Monmouth situation, we have to look at it on a county-wide basis as well and consider where we are as a county. And that is where the real shortfall occurs. The planned strategy focuses our housing on the main settlements, which does add some pressure on those areas like Monmouth, but they are our areas with the amenities and the infrastructure that's best placed to cope. It's a real challenge in a rural area like ours. Far easier in some other areas to do this. But this is an area where the amenities are best placed to cope with that extra demand. I think last but not least, the thing for me, or two things for me to mention actually, the sole reason for bringing this forward now and recommending it for approval is the 5-year land supply. So we need to be confident this can and will come forward to actually meet that need. There's no point in us granting consent and then someone sitting on a permission for 5 years. So we're recommending reduced timescales for the development to come forward. So 12 months to put in the reserve matters, and then 2 years from the outline consent to actually to start construction. That's as far as we can go, unfortunately. We can't make them finish, but that's as tight as we can get it. The applicants have agreed to that. They've been in regular liaison with us. They've been promoting the site for a number of years. They are geared up to do it, and they've had a lot of interest, including some written interests from house builders who would be looking to go on there. So we are confident this would actually deliver and help with our housing shortfall. The second issue, or the final issue just for me to raise, is around archaeology. You'll see in the report comments from Glamorgan Gwent, Archaeological Trust, who are the advisors we consult, and they're happy with the proposal. Just to make you aware of some background information, there's been some really significant finds and interest on Wannistow Road, which isn't a million miles away. It's off this plan, but it's not a million miles away. So you'll remember some past councillors constantly talking about it in terms of lakes and flooding in the past, and they have found some Bronze Age settlements probably around the edge of a lake and some real interest. So Monmouth Archaeology, who's doing some work there, is particularly of the view that archaeology could be an issue here. However, GGAT, who's our advisor, is saying that's not the case. It was talked about in the previous appeal and was held by the inspector not to be an issue. So we're recommending that there is no need for a condition, but I just wanted to make you aware. Although Monmouth Archaeology hasn't commented on this actual application, they have been in correspondence with me in the past, raising that as a concern. So I just wanted to be aware of that. We're going with GGAT's advice, and we've made them very clear of Monmouth Archaeology's findings and their advice. So, Chair, I think that summarises the main issues. It's comprehensive reports anyway, so hopefully that covers everything. But our officer recommendation is that it's approved subject to the conditions in the report. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor Feakin, I believe this is your ward, and I abut your ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. we need affordable housing in Monmouth. There's no doubt about that. This is a chance for us to get 25 units. It's essential. I've got friends that are moving out of Monmouth because they can't afford the rents, and there's no available housing. So there's no doubt about it that we need affordable housing. There's £110,000 coming forward from this site for off-site play provision. Again, that's very welcome to the town. There has been some local objections, mostly from the residents who are living quite close to the proposed development. Although I think, hand on their heart, they would probably tell you that they knew it was going to come one day. There is a constraint at the moment from the site being developed further by Welsh Water and sewage. But I think, again, hand on the heart, we know that at some point in the future, the other end of that site will come forward at some stage. Like I said, we need that affordable housing, so I personally would recommend for approval and go along with the officer's recommendation. I do think there are a couple of issues, though, which do need to be addressed. Rockfield Road at the moment is already considered to be a fast trafficked road. I pointed out to everyone on the planning site visit yesterday that the footpath leading out of the town from the existing roundabout is probably 40% narrower than the footpaths going from that roundabout into town. So I'd like to see us recommend that if this does go forward for recommendation, that the footpath from that roundabout up to the development site entrance is increased in width to allow for motorised disabled vehicles. And that can quite easily be accommodated, I'd have thought, by narrowing the hedge. It wouldn't take a big element of work. But also, more importantly, we're increasing the number of children potentially and people that are going to walk from that site into town. And we desperately need a crossing on the road down near the skate park. And so I'd like to see this scheme provide the funds for that crossing. Because at the moment there isn't a crossing, and speaking to the traffic officers, they agree that the site probably does require it, but of course that wouldn't come into the highway comments for this particular development, but of course that footfall is increasing as you get down towards the town centre. And the only other thing I would say is that for me, I would have thought that an archaeological watching brief would be important on the site. If a watching brief is there and there is no archaeological remains that are found, or there's nothing important, then it doesn't cost anything to have it, or a very small amount of money. If there is something found, then it's preserved. So I think that we should include the condition that an archaeological watching brief is included. But other than that, I would recommend for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Obviously, you weren't here before the last administration, but there was some 106 money, and I, with the previous councillor, we did ask and almost insist on a crossing on the Rockfield Road, and our highways refused that, and they put it on the Wanistow Road, because there's an awful lot of children that cross from those housing developments on the Rockfield Road. And as you said, it's a very fast piece of road, and where they showed the diagram with the yellow van on that main road, there's a deep ditch there, and it floods. It floods every year, that floods. And there is a big ditch there, and it is fast, and every year there are accidents along that road. So I'm welcoming that there is a speed restriction, will be moved further out to Rockfield Village. But also, I regret the loss of good agricultural land. I do know we need housing, but it is good agricultural land. But I think we should definitely look again on that crossing. We had the co-op stores that's been more or less completed, but why they could not have had a crossing on that road? Well, there has been accidents on the Rockfield Road with people crossing, because we have got, as we say, a very rural area. Big tractors go up and down there, and there was an accident with a child in a tractor. So I think we should really carefully look at the highway. And as you said about the pavement coming out, you've got that big ditch to the one side of it, so it might need, what they call it, piping, or what, a culvert put along there. But otherwise, I think we will welcome the development there in due course. Anyway, I regress. I go through there every day. Councillor Howard, I believe you wishes to comment next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, contrarily, I'd like to move refusal, the following reasons. Firstly, the whole point of the plan-led system is to give certainty. And by dealing with applications on an ad hoc basis to suit a short-term issue isn't certainty. And to my mind, it's not very much better than dealing with speculative applications. The first question I have then is about the second condition. I notice the reason isn't listed along with that in the report. Obviously, it's the submission of reserve matters within 12 months. So how sound is that? Are we saying then that up until the 365th day, the principle of development on the site is acceptable? On the 366th, it isn't. I see nothing in the conditions circular that suggests justification of a shortened time period on the basis of time. The second point then, and it's related, and Mark's kind of answered the question already in saying that there isn't a developer attached to the project. I'm assuming it's a landowner or a more generic developer, possibly Hallam as it was before. So within that 12 months, if you really want to get the site developed, how do you expect negotiations and a fully drawn-up scheme to be submitted in what is effectively a really short time? And then if you've got the principle of development on the land, well, isn't that going to make negotiations possibly more disadvantageous to any potential developer? The other issue then I have, and I've had a look at the appeal report, and it's been slightly misrepresented in the report, and I dare say by Mark. Paragraph 5.14 of the report, and Mark referred to it as well, says the appeal is dismissed on the basis of prematurity, and the other issue was that of character. That's not quite the case. You could argue that the issue of prematurity is still valid, given that we're going to be having an LDP review sometime this autumn, and the argument around that is just as valid then as it was prior to the LDP being introduced. But if I look at paragraph 50 of the report, sorry, while I scroll down, the inspector's conclusion was. And again, I can't argue that on the grounds of the affecting the character of the area, because this is a considerably smaller scheme than that was turned down at appeal. The weight is not so significant as to outweigh my conclusion that the development would not satisfy national or local policies in respect to the location of housing development. That's still the case now. It didn't refer to that in the report and didn't refer to it in the introduction. To my mind, it's a straightforward one. I've seen what we've done with developments elsewhere, particularly in my own ward, where we've given outline approval for an unallocated site. To my mind, that's wrong. My reason for refusal then is exactly the same as it was in the inspector's decision, that the development does not satisfy national or local policies in respect of identifying housing development land.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Anybody else wish? Sorry, Mark, do you wish to comment, please?
Yeah, it's probably worth me coming back on a few of those points, Chair. In terms of the timescale on the conditions, yeah, the legislation is clear, the regs are clear. We can give less than the usual 5 years, and on an outline consent, we can give less than the standard time periods. So I'm happy that we're okay doing that legally. And also that we're justified in terms of the timescale. The applicants have agreed to that approach as well, because there is no point in us giving them a consent that will sit there for that time period. They're happy that it is possible to get all those things on board within 12 months, so the reserve matters will be in, and we've seen it happen that quickly before, so it can be done where there's a will. So from that side of things, I'm content. Councillor Howard's completely right in terms of us meant to be having a plan-led system, and the LDP is a starting point. But national planning policy is clear that when we haven't got that 5-year supply, and there's probably only one authority in South East Wales now that has, apart from the ones with very recently adopted plans like the Vale, we do have to take this approach and look for other sites to bring forward the much needed housing. Appeal decisions are very clear on that approach as well. So that is a direction that we have to take. We have to look at these sites and consider where it's acceptable and where it isn't. So our feeling as officers is this site is acceptable. In terms of the appeal decision, it was contrary to national and local planning policy at the time because it was outside of the settlement boundary. So it still is contrary in that regard. But what we're saying is that has to be weighed up in the balance with the 5-year supply and the other policies in the plan. The scenario is different, I would argue, in terms of prematurity. That appeal decision was January 2014. The plan was adopted in February 2014. So we as an authority are very much at the end of the LDP cycle. We're now talking about the need to review because of the housing lands supply issue and the site's not coming forward quickly enough. But we're very much at the start of that process. So we're talking 3 years, I expect, before we have a new LDP in place. So we can't just hold everything in abeyance for that 3 years. And that continues building up that backlog. The shortfall continues and gets worse. That means we've got a bigger problem to deal with in the next plan. So I understand what Councillor Howard's saying and his stance, but I am confident in our recommendation in terms of the rationale and the detail of that planning condition.
Thank you for the explanation, Mark. Councillor Feakin, then Councillor Beck.
Just to come back as well on Councillor Howard's points, this site is outside the LDP. That, because it is outside the LDP, means we are squeezing the pips of this development as much as we can. We're getting 35% contribution affordable housing. If it was in the LDP, that might be down to 18, 17, 16%, because there'd be other costs or whatever which would be introduced possibly. By negotiation, by the officers, they've agreed at 35%. That's considerable. 25 units, affordable housing units for our town is considerable. And I would urge members to support this application on those grounds.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Councillor Becker?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the LDP and the requirement for housing. I think the requirement is definitely there. I think what irritates me about this is definitely that it does feel like speculative planning. You could almost move the red line there up and down to where the limit of the sewage is. You know, I'd rather the developer hadn't actually put in this permission, but had ponied up and solved the actual problem and, you know, dealt with the cost of whatever this limit is on the sewage. That said, it's an irritation, but it isn't a grounds for a refusal, unfortunately. We do need the homes. If the only way we can get the homes in the time is to allow them to do it piecemeal, then we have to allow them. But I definitely do not like this idea that we have one plan in, and then it says down at the bottom of the slides, master plan. No, this is plan B for them. You know, and that, I think that kind of speculative nature is something that we have to watch out for more and more. But equally, against, do we need the houses? Do we need the affordable housing? Can we get the 25 units? I think that we should grant it on that basis. So.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just previously all been said. You know, we're desperately behind in this county on the number of houses being built. We were in the UDP. When the next LDP comes along, we're going to be behind as well. And I think we'll all be chasing this forever, this 5-year allocation of land for housing. And the frightening thing is that the more that we underperform, the more speculators, that's just been mentioned, will take any control away from us. At the moment, this site affords 35% affordable housing, and as we know from our sites in the LDP, developers come up with all sorts of we can't do this, can't give you 35%, we can't give you 25% because of unknowns, etc. We need the houses. It's unfortunate it's in the open countryside, but this is the only available amount of land for sites like this, and we're going to get 25 affordable units here, and I certainly will be supporting it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Anybody else wish to comment? No. Councillor Feakin has moved approval. Do you have a seconder, please, Councillor Feakin? Councillor Higginson seconds. It's a show of hands for approval, please.
So that's 12 for approval, Chairman.
And 1 against. Councillor Brown, you abstained or against?
Abstained.
Abstained.
And
and Councillor.
So it's approved, 12 votes for, 1 against.
Against, one abstention. Thank you, Rob. Now we go to...
Chair, sorry, just for clarity, Phil was just quizzing me on the footpath improvements that Councillor Feekins mentioned.
Yes.
Just to make it clear, they're covered in the Section 278 legal agreement, so that's all included.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Right. Yeah. We now go to page 59, and this is Andy, and this is application 00705. Craig, is this you?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig.
Hello, committee. This application is for 250 seated football stand with associated hard standing at Dundee Athletic Football Club. This is, members went to site yesterday, and this is a picture of the site from yesterday. If you'd like to click on, Phil. This is the club and the site at present. Does it go? Yeah, so if you keep going. So this is a plan of the site where the football stand will be constructed. As you can see, it's halfway down the existing football pitch. It's 46 metres in length and about 3.7 metres in width. And it'll have a lean-to roof. If you go to the next plan, please, Phil. A lean-to roof, which will be approximately 3.5 metres in height. It's pretty standard metal framed football stand building. As you can see there, it will be erected to the side. It's not too excessive in height. The application also seeks associated works in terms of hard servicing of the site, and the justification for the stand is due to the football club being promoted to the Welsh League, and in order for them to play in that league, they do actually need a stand of this stature and of this stance. The application has, as the report outlines, several objections in relation to several different concerns in relation to the loss of the open space, concerns over noise, concerns over the closeness of the football stand to residential properties. Planning officers have considered the objections which have been raised and feel that this is an existing site, existing football site and open space, and the residential amenity of the neighbouring properties wouldn't be affected to an unacceptable level. The visual impact of the proposed stand is considered to be acceptable. It's a standard football stand. It's of metal construction. It's utilitarian in appearance. However, it have a functional requirement for the site to provide spectators to view the football. In relation to some of the concerns relating to the parking and issues relating to the lost open space, as outlined in the report, there would be parking provided to the right where the existing compounds and containers are, so there would be the same level of parking for the site. As outlined in the report, the proposed development is considered to have acceptable visual impact, would not have an unacceptable impact on residential amenity, and therefore officers are recommending the application is approved subject to the conditions outlined in the report.
Right, thank you, Craig. I believe we have the local member wishes to speak. Councillor Dimmock, you have 6 minutes and 2 minutes later to sum up if you so wish.
Thank you, Chair. I promise you all I won't take 6 minutes. I'll try and keep this short and sweet as we're all tired and warm. I'd like to see this application approved for NDAFC. It is vitally important to the club to have this stand in the pathways in order for them to continue playing in Division 1 within the Welsh League, which enables them to provide a brilliant building block for younger players to improve. Without this, they would be demoted, which would have a devastating effect on all the hard work that they've done in order to reach this level. To play in the Welsh League is a huge achievement, as it is the highest level you can go in Wales. I appreciate some of the residents' concerns and them thinking the club will suffer with parking issues. However, I believe that this wouldn't necessarily see an increase in supporters, as they are in their second season playing at this level and have always been manageable. The club do many events such as family fun days, fireworks displays. Recently they had Gwent County there, saw a large number of supporters. There wasn't an issue that day. So they're used to the large number of turnout. And they always deal with the level of residents and traffic and ensure that the local residents don't have issues with congestion and parking. So that's me, I'm finished. I just want to quote some numbers to you so you understand the impact it has. They have 16 junior teams, that's 200 junior members. 4 senior teams with over 90 members, that's over 400 club membership. So this does affect a lot of people from the area and surrounding areas too. So it is important this goes ahead. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Alan Davis wishes to speak first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I believe a similar development has recently taken place in Caldicot for Caldicot Town football team. And these football clubs do tremendous work in the community with what they do with the young people. You know, these young people would be on the streets, perhaps causing mayhem, where they got discipline, and it is really good for the community, I think, and I move approval of it, please. Thank you.
And also wonderful health benefits, I should think, and tire them out and keep them out of mischief. I fully agree with that, Councillor, any day. Councillor Feakin.
I just second that movement.
Anybody else wish to comment? Now, Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, clubs like these are taking loads of kids off the streets and doing something, and you know, which is good discipline for them. There's plenty of room there for the stand. There's plenty of room for parking. Besides, it's a good site, and I will support the proposal and the second.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown. Councillor Davis, could you turn your microphone off, please? Sorry, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to support this application. Just a quick query for officers. There was a comment about do not want adverts on the stands. What's the position on adverts in relation to the stands? I mean, is it something that needs planning permission anyway? Thank you.
Depends on the size.
That's a really challenging question, because the advert regs are a minefield. You need a doctorate to understand them. I'm pretty certain if it's within a kind of a properly enclosed area, then they wouldn't need additional consent. So the kind of things you might have on the barriers facing into the pitch, they wouldn't normally need permission. But any other sort of significantly commercial adverts aimed at being seen from outside the site, they would. Does that sound right, Paula? Yeah. Paula taught me all this, so it's her fault if it's wrong.
Councillor Becker.
Just as an aside, can we not sort of suggest that the default position of all young people is to run and terrorise people in the streets? There's actually quite a lot of them who play football and who don't are very constructive young people. So.
I wasn't saying that they were all out of hand, actually. My own weren't anyway, they all played rugby. Councillor Murphy.
Just to support the application and to congratulate the club on their achievement. I think it's worth noting that, and I'm quite happy to support it.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Murphy, for that. So it's been... did you want to sum up at all, Councillor? No, I didn't think so. Right, who'd moved that then? I think it was Councillor Feakin and... Councillor Davis moved, Councillor Feakin seconded. Show of hands for approval, please.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. Next application, 00728 and 5 Lanes Cowent, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. This application is a reserved matters application for 4 detached dwellings at the former Wentwood Inn in Cowent. The members will remember to go on site yesterday. As this photograph outlines the site, it has existing 2 access points at the moment to the site. So let's take the next photo, Phil. That's the access to the east, I believe. If you'd like to go to the next picture. That's the existing site there at the back with a retaining wall that were falling down. This application was the subject of a previous appeal, so outline consent has been granted at appeal for 4 dwellings at the site. And as I explained to members yesterday, the application wasn't subject to any affordable housing contribution, so there wouldn't be any affordable contribution from this site, from the outline consent. So this application's reserved matters just deals with the site and design of the application and the access proposed. So this is the proposed layout. As you can see, the application is to close the one access up and just to have one access to the east. The application, as you can see on the site there, is for 4 dwellings with associated garages, double garages. There's plenty of open space to the front with turning and a private driveway as well. If you go to the next picture, please. If you see from the top there as well, the street scene and the contemporary design which has been gone for. The application has been consulted on with the landscape officer who hasn't any concerns with it. There was some amendments made to the scheme in terms of the palette of materials, so it has been reduced so that it's simpler to have slate, timber cladding and white render and potentially some stone. There is a condition in relation to the quality of the materials which officers will check before development commences. If you want to go through the different house types, so there's 4 different house types, all slightly different to create an interesting street scene along the road there. So the application has gone out to consultation, full consultation, and there's been no objections from any parties. Officers considered that the proposed design, scale and form of the development is acceptable. Consultation has been conducted with Highways Department and they haven't got any concerns subject to the western access being closed up, and the applicants will have to sign into Section 38 to agree the exact details in terms of the access over the highway land. Therefore, officers are recommending the application is approved subject to the outlined conditions.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Murphy, is this your ward, please?
Yes, Chair, and I'm quite happy to support it. It has a lot of support locally. It is right that the western entrance is blocked off. There's quite a bit of traffic movement that end of the site, so concentrating it on the eastern end is a big improvement. The site has been an eyesore and a bone of contention for years, and I can't wait to see it start.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Davis.
I'd just like to say that I concur with what Councillor Murphy is saying. It was a shame to see the old Wentwood Inn go. I had many a good meal there many years ago, but this site really needs developing. It is an eyesore now, and therefore I second Councillor Murphy's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, then Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really pleased with the design. It's excellent. I could make a plea, though. I don't know if we can do this or not, but there's an awful lot of render on these dwellings. And if it's through colour render, the long-term situation is not good. Those estates that we've developed around this county using this particular product have shown a deterioration, and I can take you to 1 or 2 which are absolutely ghastly. And I would ask us if we could just have straightforward render with a coating on the top, and then it will always look much better than with through colour rendering, which deteriorates over time.
I think it's stated that it was
Whether
white.
we can do it or not, don't tell me I can't.
It was stated, I believe it was stated white render,
Yeah.
wasn't it, or cream or something.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, I'd suggest that would be a step too far for our controls. I would just say, I think there's 2 issues around the through colour render. One is if it isn't done very well, but also there's an issue just around maintenance. I live in a property with it, and it gets a bit of mouldy, algae stuff, the same as any house, and you just buy some stuff in B&Q and spray it, and it's very easy, and hopefully if you pop around you'll see which one's mine and which one's my next door neighbour's. Screen infrastructure, Peter. No, mine's a clean one, thank you. But it is something that you can do with simple maintenance. It needn't be a massive problem.
But these are probably the most 4 outstanding properties we're going to give permission for in Monmouthshire this year. They're on in a prominent position on a prominent road. They're extremely valuable, and I'm just giving an aid and a help to the prospective purchasers that they have them built properly.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought it was mentioned on site about something about an informative in relation to the fiberglass tank, and that doesn't seem to be included in the conditions. Thank you.
No, so
Yeah, that's something that we can add.
Yeah, raised before the report was finished. Raised, sorry, after the report was finished.
So it will be included then?
We'll add as,
We can add it, yes.
add as an informative.
I believe the owner is aware of that anyway, and it comes under building regs, I believe, doesn't it? Is it or not? I think they're aware of it anyway. Yeah, you've moved approval, Phil.
I have, and I have actually made sure that the developer is aware of the tank as well. But I mean, it'll be put in there. But yeah.
I was aware of it yesterday. Councillor Clark seconds it. Yeah,
Sorry, could I clarify? Is an informative going on about this or not? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
It's been proposed and seconded by Councillor Clark. Nobody else wishes to comment now before I take the vote. Right, hands for approval, please. Right, thank you. Next application, 79 to 84 00786, Mardi Abergavenny.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks permission for the change of use of a convenience store to a fish and chip shop at Mardi Stores in Abergavenny. The external elevations will remain the same, however there will be an extraction unit to the north side of the roof. An additional application has also been submitted for the signage. The premises in question is a vacant shop, however the area is adequately served with a retail outlet in the vicinity. The principle of changing the use to a fish and chip shop therefore complies with policy CRF1 and RET3 of the LDP. Whilst the previous shop had long opening hours as a convenience store, the fish and chip shop is proposed to have opening hours of 11 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Monday to Saturday, which is considered reasonable given the proximity to nearby houses. Details of the proposed extraction and filter system have been submitted and assessed by the Council's Environmental Health Officer, who considers them to be acceptable. Therefore, it's considered that the proposal will not cause harm to the residential amenity of the neighbouring properties. With regard to the parking issues, whilst it's noted that this area has a pinch point where the highway narrows, the site does have a lawful use as a retail outlet. Therefore, there are no reasonable grounds to object on highway issues. Indeed, it was considered that a fish and chip shop would have less impact than a convenience store, as it has restricted opening hours. It's also worth noting that the landlady of the Crown and Sceptre public house has offered the use of her car park free of charge to users of the chip shop, which the applicant intends to advertise in the shop window, should the application be approved. In conclusion, it's considered that the proposal accords with planning policy and officers recommend approval of the application, subject to the conditions outlined in the report. I would, however, point out that the conditions in red in the report should be deleted, as they are not considered to be necessary as they relate to other legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Abergavenny members. Councillor Harris first then, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's right next door to my ward, and just looking at the report, parking has been mentioned, and there are some very narrow roads just beyond where the chip shop will be sited, and they always cause a bit of a problem. But in many respects, the parking adds to traffic calming in the area, because the Hereford Road coming up from Abergavenny is a rat race. It really is. So having this back in use again is going to solve that to a certain extent. Looking at the consultation responses, 14 letters of objection, 32 letters of support. You don't often see that. I'm glad the letters of support outweigh the objections, and I'm happy to move approval.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moran-Powell and Councillor Becker. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Going back to the parking, I believe that the pub next door has offered its parking there. They can park there as well. it's quite sensible. You have fish and chips and you go and park there and you're going to get a drink, aren't you? So they're not daft. No, I think it's a good thing. There's a lot of people out there that would like that facility, and I support it.
Councillor Becker?
I was just going to say about the parking being offered in the pub as well. So I'll move for approval.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody else wish to comment? No. Right. Councillor Harris, you moved approval, did you? Maureen Powell seconded. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
Approved, Chairman, unanimously.
Councillor Giles Howard didn't.
Oh, I do apologise.
Thank you very much, Rob. We now go to Monmouth, and this is application 00808 at the Temporary Sports Building for the comprehensive.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this application is at Monmouth Leisure Centre, Old Ixton Road, Monmouth. It's for the construction of a temporary sports building in association with Monmouth Comprehensive School during the construction period for the new 21st century school. The application seeks planning consent for the construction of the building. Phil, if you just want to go on to the next slide. To the south there is the existing leisure centre. This is where the car park is, and the proposed temporary sports hall will be constructed on the existing tennis courts. The application also seeks consent for some associated container buildings for toilets and for changing room facilities for the pupils using the sports hall. So the building itself, temporary structure, would be 35 metres by approximately 20 metres in footprint. It would measure about 5 metres to the eaves and approximately 8.4 metres to the ridge. It would be a metal clad building and have constructed with a PVC membrane, which would be a translucent material over the top of the building, but it would mainly be constructed of aluminium. It's quite utilitarian in construction, and it's fit for purpose in terms of being a temporary structure while the construction works are going on for the school. And obviously the other decision which relates to the renovation of the leisure centre as well, which planning committee members have also considered and approved previously. If we move on to the next slide. So this pictures also just outline the containers which are going to be used during the construction process. Obviously this is a temporary solution whilst the works are going on to meet the educational requirements of the pupils of the school. So this will be the facilities available to them. So the application has gone through a full consultation process. There have been no objections from Monmouth Town Council, no objections from any third parties or any residents in the area. Highways have not got any concerns in terms of the amount of parking that will be lost during this period. It's considered to be acceptable. It's only the tennis courts are used as overflow parking in any case. The site does lie within a flood zone, and NIW have considered the proposals and have outlined that there would be a minimum requirement for the floor levels, which would be a condition of any approval which would be given, which would be 1705, and that is considered to be acceptable from all parties, so that it would be considered to be not have a flood risk to any users of the building, and again it would be a temporary solution in any case. So in terms of visual impact, the proposed development is considered to be quite utilitarian in its appearance. However, it's supposed to be fit for purpose. It's something that you'd associate with a school site, and something that is considered to be appropriate for the short period that it would be up for. The application is not considered to have a harmful impact on the street scene or considered to have a harmful impact on residential amenity in the area. As a result, the application is being recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined, which one relates to the flooding in terms of the finished floor level, and the second is that it will be removed from the site 12 months from the school coming into 12 months the school building coming into beneficial use. So the application is recommended for approval.
Right, thank you very much. Is this your ward, or are you speaking as a town councillor?
No, it's not in my ward. It's my adjoining ward.
That's what I thought it was. Right.
But could I speak?
Yes,
okay?
yes, certainly.
Okay.
Yes,
Yep.
carry on.
And just to declare a personal interest in that, I am a member. I have gym membership, just so everyone's aware. But I would support the officer's recommendation for approval. It's a temporary structure, and it provides, most importantly, the continuation and provision of service, which is more important for gym members from all walks of life that use the facilities. So I would move to recommend approval.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment now? Councillor Dovey.
issue or not. Sorry. I'm not too sure whether it's a planning issue or not. But is it something that's discarded, or are we buying it, or are we renting it, or what happens? What happens to it? You know.
That isn't for us to comment. It is just the structure is going to be temporarily in use there on that ground. That's what we're dealing.
You expect me to try, wouldn't you?
So, Councillor Becker, please.
How solid is that 12-month temporary condition?
Well, that is the condition on the consent. If anybody, if the council wanted any additional time, they'd have to apply, make an application.
Right, they'd have to apply again for
it to be
additional time.
reconsidered, and that will come before the committee.
Councillor Webb?
I'll second the approval, please.
Right, it's been moved and seconded for approval. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. We now go to page 89 to 92, Clyther Motors, Merthyr Road, Llanfoist.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks permission for alterations to a car sales garage at Merthyr Road, Llanfoist. That's a photograph of the building that we saw on site yesterday. Pretty nondescript. The alterations comprise partial cladding with grey prefabricated cladding, new grey aluminium doors and windows, and raising of the parapet to make it a uniform height. So if we can move to the proposed... that's the building in question. The elevations, please, Phil. That's existing, and that is proposed. The footprint of the building will be unchanged. The site is prominently located within the centre of the village of Llanfoist. The building has no particular architectural merit and has a rather tired appearance. And as we saw yesterday, it's a mixture of painted blockwork and cladding and various other bits of material. The surrounding village is mainly residential with a variety of styles, designs and materials. The site is adjacent to another car sales garage, and together they occupy a sizable area. The changes to the building will significantly alter its appearance, but is considered not to be to the detriment of the surrounding village. The building itself will not be enlarged, and the light grey cladding is typical of modern car sales showrooms. It's not considered that the changes would cause such harm to the visual amenity of the village so as to warrant refusal. No issues relating to residential amenity are envisaged, and no objections have been received from either local residents or the Community Council. Any proposed signs and adverts will be subject to a separate application for advertisement consent. Officers recommend approval of this application, subject to the conditions outlined in the report, including the requirement to submit samples of the cladding for approval prior to commencement.
Thank you very much, Paula. I believe this is your award, is it, Giles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it is. And as I indicated at the start of the meeting, I think my comments that were included in the report probably enough to suggest I have a view prior to it being determined. I've no problem against the site being developed. I actively welcome them, the new business, the provision of local jobs. The only thing I'd like members to consider, and why I asked for it to come to committee in the first place, is in respect of the cladding. In my response, I noted some of the other developments around Llanfoist and Abergavenny, the Aldi store, given its proximity to the conservation area. We wouldn't accept the standard store appearance and elevations. The Premier Inn at Llanfoist was in a negotiation about introducing stone away from their standard pattern of development. So my point is then, why go to the effort of seeking to improve schemes in other locations, but when you've got something like this that is quite prominent, would you not go to the same trouble to try and improve it? I think the overall height of the building is going to be level. There is some undulation currently. I appreciate that the site isn't very attractive. It needs refurbishment, it needs investment, and hopefully it's going to get it. Great. My worry is that as it stands, and without the details of the forthcoming advertisement application, the use of grey cladding over the whole of the elevation is more suited to something in an industrial location and not smack bang in the middle of a village where you've got mostly residential properties, other than the garage next door, which has an office and a garage of a very small domestic scale. But otherwise, that doesn't relate to anything else. And all I would ask is members to consider is, in terms of its appearance, could it be improved so that you had a little bit of variation on the elevations? Be it the use of the grey cladding above the window level and maybe a different smooth cladding below that. I don't know. I just feel that as it stands, and given that the people of Lamfoyce made it very clear that planning was a big issue for them in the run-up to the last election, the village is going to live with it for some time. I just want to make sure that people don't drive past in a couple of years' time and think, how the hell did they let that go through? That's the only reason. No objection in principle, but please consider the materials.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Webb?
Yeah, I was just going to say I can quite see what Councillor House is saying, because it's not good at the moment and we want it to be good now, and it just does need exactly what he said, some differential in the actual frontage there, in the facade. Yeah. It's quite an important location, really. The road going up to the top over to Blaenavon. And
thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can see the point. I just wonder how you do it. Can we go back to the existing building, please, Phil? The frontage. There is a bit of a drop each side, and I suppose potentially you could have a piece in the middle that would have a sign on it. But having said all of that, it is, as was explained to us in the officer's introduction, likely to be very much like most car showrooms that you see around these days. It is a typical design for a car showroom, and they all benefit from the logos that are put on them, which obviously would be subject to a separate application. When it originally goes up, if it goes up without those advertising signs being agreed at that time, it's going to look absolutely awful. So I would hope that we have sorted the signage out prior to commencement. Yeah, I can see the point about staggering it, but I'm not really sure how it can be done. I don't know whether officers have got a view on it.
And I think perhaps with a Premier Inn, you've got other Premier Inns, and when you're building something new, it's a little bit different, trying to make a bad job better, isn't it, really? So, Councillor Higginson?
Just a quick comment. I mean, there's been a garage on that site for many, many years. And of course, it has improved over time. And of course, it's not a Ford garage anymore. Those signs are long gone. Or at least they weren't there yesterday anyway. So, yeah, I mean, there's only certain things we can do, I suppose. But if they can, if we could put on a condition to go along with what Councillor Howard said up to a point, I suppose, to improve that frontage, it will make it a bit more acceptable to the eye then, if I put it that way. But that garage was there before those houses the other side of the road.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When you look at the other buildings that have gone up in the area, like the hotel, the burger bar, etc., the buildings are all one entity with their corporate identity, their VM and whatever you want to call it. What you've got here is something that is being applied to get the corporate identity across in the cheapest way, I guess, and with the lowest maintenance. There might be an opportunity, perhaps for officers to get this particular retailer to speak to, I haven't got my glasses, speak to the motor franchise and say, you know, this is a bit of an iconic building. I mean, it's been there for donkey's years. I can remember when it was a village station and whatnot. It has a style to it. They might come up with some suggestions as to how their corporate identity could be used in a way that is would be a bit of a one-off and stand-off up in the area, especially. It's a. Can you tell me who they? Kia. Yeah, they're anxious to make an impact in the country, and they are. It might be something that they could say, well, look what we've done, and put it in their corporate magazine, and other retailers and all would look at it. So just a throwaway thought that you might get the car company involved in trying to come up with a solution that's more imaginative than that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown and Councillor Harris and Councillor Feakin. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think in terms of the visual amenity, if you look at 5.1.1, it talks about the existing rendered building, which features an undulating parapet along the main facade fronting the road, is not of particular architectural merit and is rather tired in appearance. I think the reason why it's tired in appearance is perhaps it needed re-rendering and repainting, and if it had been, then obviously in comparison the improvements suggested here wouldn't necessarily look that good. So I can't see any reason why they can't have a facade that's half render and half cladding, at least to provide a better visual amenity for a village location. And I'm not sure whether or not that can be conditioned or subject to negotiation or what, but I'd be interested to hear the officer's opinion on that.
Chair,
Thank you.
A change that drastic would need to be negotiated rather than conditioned. I was just trying to get it clear in my mind what some members' concerns are. Is it the cladding full stop? Is it that the cladding doesn't follow the shape of the building? Because I think that very much depends if we're in the territory of refuse, negotiate, or just say yes as it is.
I'll take the rest of the comments first. See, Councillor Harris and Councillor Feakin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A bit of clarification, first of all. Phil was indicating that it'll look good once the signs are up. Is that what's going to happen if we say yes immediately?
Potentially, I think. But
Not actually. So, okay. But they'll want those Kia signs there if... well, having passed this place for 40 years, on and off, I just want to get past it quickly, to be perfectly honest. It honestly does that to me. Anything has got to be better than what is there at the moment, and I can say that with, relish, to be perfectly honest. So. I mean, if we've got two alternatives today, haven't we? We'll either say yes or defer, presumably. And if we're going to defer, I'm not quite sure what our arguments are going to be. So I'll wait and see what happens.
Councillor Feakin?
Could I propose that we defer it and negotiate with the applicant? And maybe involve the local member to see if there's a better design that would be more acceptable. Design is subjective, but it is a sensitive area. It is leading up to into the national park, and I think there are considerations. And it is directly opposite houses, and it is not in a business park, or it's not in an industrial unit. So I think that this would look rather odd in that location. But there may be a sort of montage of the both render, as Councillor Brown said, some render and also some of the cladding would suit the area well. But yeah, my recommendation would be to defer it and negotiate with the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Councillor Murphy?
Can I just clarify, Chair? Am I right, the application for the signage has not come in yet, or it hasn't been processed yet? Yeah. I've just got the feeling that I don't really object to that as it is. And the reason I don't object to it is it's got nice signs on it that break it all up. And I'd feel a lot happier about the proposal if I knew what the signage was, because that signage is going to have a massive impact on the visuals.
We're like putting the cart before the horse, really, aren't we? Because
so
I think
I would prefer to see this application coming back together with the signage, so we could get a much better idea as to what it's going to look like in the street scene. Now, whether we can achieve that, I'll take advice. But you know, I think that would alter. Listening to what members have said, I think we'd have a much more sort of a more satisfactory application in front of us if we knew what the signage was.
Yeah, Chair, my advice to you would be, we can do that. We can ask them to apply for the adverts and either bring them both back here or to panel, whichever. I guess we just need to, or they and we need to have some kind of level of comfort that that's likely to make the difference. But if we're then having this conversation in 2 months' time, saying, oh no, just render it, keep the shape of the building, then we might as well go back with that message now. So just trying to get that clear, I think, in our own minds.
If it helps members, Chair, I'd be prepared to recommend approval if it had similar signs to that on it, because I think that is what makes that look like a car showroom, looks like a professional outfit in the modern car showroom design. So, as I said, if it helps, I would support that.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Howard?
Yeah, thank you. If it helps, Mark, it's the cladding is the issue, not the squaring off of the building, not the revisions to the fenestration. It's just the grey box profile metal or whatever it is to be on there. And as Phil and other members have noticed, advertisements can make a massive difference. Most of the car dealerships that I've seen or applications I've handled myself, the fascias are very different. They tend to have lend the building a less of a vertical emphasis, and basically wrap around the front and the corner of a building, and that can make a very big difference to how a building looks as opposed to having those ovals on there. So yeah, that's all I'd ask members to consider is just deferring it so we can have a chat with the agent, see what their ideas for the advert scheme are. And it could be that if it was a full width fascia, and that was their intent, that would be enough to break up the grey mass. I say I've really no objection against the scheme, and I'd like to see it go ahead and be successful. Just want it to look as good as it can.
Thank you, Councillor.
Are you concerned about the colour as well? Because it's grey.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Councillor Harris, did you wish to, and then Councillor Dovey.
You wanted to come myself. I did, but nobody seemed to recognise the man.
Councillor Higginson then?
Yeah, just a point I want to make is planning permission is sought to carry out various alterations to the building, which is set in part refaced with grey prefabricated cladding. So, you know, it seems to me as though there's issues within there that have yet to be determined by the planning officers or accepted.
No, the alterations, Councillor Howard referred to them just now. So there's changes to fenestration and the openings, and a couple of other bits. But yeah, it's more than just the cladding. It's just, I think our discussion's focused on the cladding. I think, well, Councillor Howard certainly said he's happy with the other bits.
Councillor Harris and Councillor Dovey quickly, and then Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I brought up the signs because if it was going to be without the signs, it would be appalling, to be perfectly honest. Almost as bad as it is at the moment, but not quite. If it's like that, I go along. I second what Phil has said. I could live with that. if it's going to be something like that. And I don't see that they would come forward with a diagram like that if that's really not a lot of, not what they really had in mind.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I thought I'd said it. That grey is the grey they use everywhere if you have a look at their franchises. And those signs are really their corporate identity. I think the fact that they've taken the cladding up at the front is to hide the gable ends. I don't know whether they're doing anything structural behind it or not, or if it's just going to be put up and it's sort of propped up against or fixed to the wall, and there's blanks behind it, if you know what I mean. It isn't too inspiring. But as I said, I would have thought that if the retailer has a letter from us that says something along the lines that they are a good corporate brand, we recognise that and it's important and all that sort of thing, but we don't think that they're doing themselves the best that they could do for that location, and see where it gets us. I mean, or he should see where it gets him.
Councillor
I've
Dowie,
seen
I
it
think
done
you've made your
elsewhere.
point.
You know, you can't tell the right story.
Thank you. Councillor Becker now.
A quick image search shows that there's a great deal of diversity in Kia's showrooms across the UK. Some of them are better solutions than this, some of them are worse solutions than this. There is clearly a great deal of flexibility in their branding. I thought this was a bit of a non-issue when we started talking about it, but now I look at it now and I think, yes, it is a grey box. Could they do more? It's a hodgepodge of a building. Something needs to be done with it, but there's a Kia showroom in Exeter that you could use as an example that has a similar sort of outline to the frontage, which has been done in a very nice sort of cladding and signage alternative. So they clearly have a lot of options. Why don't we hold them to one of them? So.
Right. Yeah. Local member, what would you suggest, or what would you hope for?
Madam Chair, I'd hope for the application to be deferred for negotiation of the external finish only. That's just it.
Suggestions will come forward. With the local member, definitely. I did not suggest that, Councillor Harris. Now, the last application for today, I shall leave the chamber, and Councillor Clark will do it, and I'll come back and then to do the appeals decision. And also, Mark has something as well that he will put forward to the committee, and we will not be live streaming when he does his presentation. So at the moment, I will leave the chamber. Thank you.
Who's doing this one?
Who's doing this last one?
Right, we're on page 93 to 96, application 00898, and Paul is going to take us through it.
Okay. Thank you. This application relates to the proposed construction of a lean-to extension to an existing barn at Red House Farm, Rockfield. The application is presented to Planning Committee as the applicant is related to a member of the Planning Committee. The proposed lean-to will measure 18.3 metres long by 6.1 metres wide, 3 metres to the eaves and 4.2 metres to its highest point. The proposed materials are natural grey fibre cement for the roof and box profile in slate blue for the walls. It's considered that the lean-to would be acceptable in terms of scale and appearance and contained within the farmstead group of buildings, limiting its visual impact on the area. There's considered to be no harm to anyone's residential amenity, but would be a utilitarian agricultural building which is characteristic of the rural landscape. Officers therefore recommend approval of this application.
Councillor Feakins.
I'd move to approve, please, Chair.
Seconded, yeah, by Councillor Murphy. Anybody else wish to add to that? All those in favour, please show.
Chairman.
Thank you. Should we just hold on a moment? We've got one or two matters to discuss. Well, we say we're all as quick as that. It would be ever so much. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, members. The item on 5 on the agenda now is the appeal decision, the stables. Anybody wish to comment on that now? Paula?
I'll just
Thank you.
make some quick comments. This was a stable building that was built in 2007, and it was built of blockwork. And they made an application to convert it to holiday let, which the council refused as contrary to policy. And the inspector upheld our decision. She noted that it was of modern construction and it would have, once it's been converted to a holiday let, would have a domestic scale more akin to a suburban bungalow, incongruous in the countryside setting. So she dismissed the appeal and upheld our decision.
Thank you for that, Paula. Mark, I believe you have something you wish to discuss now with the members.
Yeah, Chair, it's just to talk through decision making. I got a